I've always believed that the open road had its own kind of promise. Freedom in its truest form. Asphalt stretching to the horizon, the soft hum of my RV engine beneath me, and that quiet sense that I could go anywhere, be anyone, leave everything behind. But sometimes I wonder if that promise has a darker side. If the same roads that set you free can also lead you somewhere you were never meant to go. I learned this the hard way on a night that began like any other, when I missed an exit and drove into something I still can't explain. It was early autumn, crisp air bleeding into the last warm days of September. I was heading west out of Arkansas toward Oklahoma, a long solo trip meant to clear my head after a messy breakup. My RV was my sanctuary. Small, sturdy, and packed with the essentials. A propane stove, a fold-out bed, and my German Shepherd, Max, whose steady breathing kept me grounded on lonely nights. I wasn't in a rush. I liked stopping at little roadside campgrounds, the kind with faded signs and picnic tables scarred with initials carved decades ago. That night, I planned to reach a state park just past the Oklahoma border. It should have been straightforward. One highway, one exit, a single winding road into the campground. But somewhere outside Fort Smith, in that stretch where pine and oak grow dense on either side of the asphalt, I missed my turn. It was a simple mistake, a missed sign I didn't notice in time. I saw it flash by too late, and when I checked the GPS, it froze, spinning endlessly without recalculating. I figured I'd take the next exit, loop around, and get back on track. Easy enough. But the next exit came miles later, further than I expected, a narrow slip of pavement cutting off into a 2-lane road lined with unlit fields. There were no gas stations, no truck stops, just dark silhouettes of barns against the starlight. I told myself it was fine, just a detour. I'd rejoin the highway soon. But that road kept going. No lights, no traffic. And when I finally saw another sign, it was weathered wood, not metal, and it pointed toward a place I'd never heard of. Dry Creek. I hesitated. Max whined softly in the passenger seat, ears twitching like he sensed something I didn't. My instinct told me to turn back, but the road was too narrow to reverse easily, and my fuel gauge had dipped lower than I liked. Just until I find a place to pull over, I told him, forcing confidence into my voice. The road dipped and curved, trees closing in overhead like a tunnel. My headlights cut through the dark, but it felt like they weren't enough, like something was swallowing the light as soon as it left my beams. About 15 minutes in, I spotted movement. A figure, pale in my headlights, standing at the shoulder. I slowed instinctively. It was a man, middle-aged, beard unkempt, wearing a flannel shirt and jeans that looked decades old. He didn't wave, he didn't move at all. He just stood there staring straight ahead, like I wasn't even there. I swerved slightly to avoid him, my heart pounding, glancing back in my mirrors. He was gone. Completely. Like he'd never been there. Max growled low in his throat, staring at the empty road behind us, and that's when the unease really started to set in. I should have turned around then. But a part of me, maybe out of stubbornness or exhaustion, kept going. The GPS was still dead. No bars on my phone. I'd gone too far to know how many turns I'd taken, how many forks I'd passed, and then I saw it, a sign for Dry Creek Campground. Relief flooded through me. At least there was somewhere to park, to rest, to figure out my next move. The sign pointed down a gravel path so narrow I had to fold my mirrors in to avoid scraping the branches that clawed at my RV's sides. It opened suddenly into a clearing, 6 old concrete pads where RVs might have parked once, ringed by dead fire pits and overgrown weeds. Not a single soul in sight. No ranger station. No lights. Just the wind whispering through the pines. I killed the engine, and for a moment the silence was deafening. Max pressed close to my leg, restless. I stepped outside, my boots crunching on gravel, and the smell hit me first. Damp earth, metallic, like rust or blood carried faintly on the air. It was sharp enough that I instinctively covered my nose. That's when I noticed it. Every sound seemed off. The wind didn't sound like wind. It was rhythmic, almost like breathing, and it came from all directions at once. I told myself it was just the trees swaying, branches rubbing, but it didn't feel right. Nothing about this place felt right. I decided I'd stay locked in the RV for the night, leave at first light. I double-checked every latch, drew the curtains tight, and lay down with Max at my side, his head on my chest. I tried to sleep, tried to ignore the unease gnawing at my gut. But then the knocking started. Soft at first, like something tapping the side of the RV near the rear bumper. Max's ears shot up, his growl deepened. Tap, 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 then silence. I held my breath. Another tap, closer this time, near the door. Max barked sharply, lunging toward it, teeth bared. I grabbed the flashlight I kept by my bed, flicked it on, and scanned through the narrow window slit in the curtain. No one was there. My skin crawled. I thought about driving off right then, but fear rooted me. What if I backed into a ditch? What if whoever was out there wanted me to panic and come outside? I stayed put, heart hammering, whispering to Max to quiet down. And then I heard it, a voice. It was faint, distant, but clear. Help, I froze. It came again, closer this time, soft and trembling. Help, please. Every instinct screamed at me to stay inside, but it sounded human, desperate. I couldn't ignore it. Could I? My hand hovered over the door handle. Max growled louder, snapping me out of my hesitation. That's when I realized the voice wasn't moving. It was looping. The same words, the same pitch, like a recording stuck on repeat. And suddenly I knew deep in my bones that whatever was out there, it wasn't human. I backed away from the door slowly, pulse thudding in my ears so loud it almost drowned out the voice. Max pressed himself against my leg, trembling, not from fear, but from restraint, as if every fiber of his being wanted to lunge through that door and tear apart whatever was mimicking those cries. My hands shook uncontrollably as I reached for my keys. I couldn't stay here. Not another second. The voice stopped. Dead silence. I stood there, holding my breath, tired, straining to hear anything in that suffocating quiet. And then 3 heavy knocks, right against the side of the RV, just beneath the window. Not tapping this time. Hard. Deliberate. The entire vehicle rocked slightly from the impact. Max erupted in furious barking, clawing at the floor near the door. I snapped. I didn't care about the darkness outside or the risk of getting lost deeper into those back roads. I just needed to leave. I turned the ignition. The RV's engine roared to life, its sound shattering that unnatural stillness. I threw it in gear, headlights cutting through the clearing like a lifeline, and I floored it down the gravel path, branches scraping the sides with ear-splitting screeches. Max scrambled onto the passenger seat, barking wildly at the window as if something was following us. I couldn't look. I couldn't bear to. My only thought was out, out, out. The path twisted more sharply than I remembered. At one turn, my tires skidded on loose gravel, and I nearly clipped a tree, my heart hammering against my ribs. And then, just as suddenly as I'd entered, I saw pavement again. The narrow road that had led me here. Relief washed through me, but it was fleeting. Because standing dead center in my headlights was that same man from before, the one in the flannel shirt. He wasn't looking away this time. He was staring straight at me. I slammed on the brakes so hard my seatbelt locked, jerking me forward. Max growled, hackles raised, his teeth bared in a vicious snarl I'd never heard from him before. The man didn't move. His eyes seemed wrong, too wide, too glassy, reflecting my headlights like an animal's. I blinked, and for half a second it looked like his mouth moved. Not a full expression, just a twitch, a shadow of something inhuman trying to mimic a smile. I swerved around him, tires screeching, refusing to glance in the mirror until I'd put miles between us. When I finally dared, there was nothing behind me. Just empty road. It felt like hours before I spotted a familiar green highway sign, Interstate 40 East, 2 miles. I nearly wept with relief. I stayed on that highway until dawn, driving until my hands were stiff from gripping the wheel, and Max had curled up beside me, finally silent. When I pulled into a busy travel plaza under the glaring safety of neon lights, I locked every door, shut every curtain, and sat there until the sun was high enough to burn the shadows away. By daylight, it felt unreal. A bad dream stretched thin across too many empty miles. But the scratches along the side of my RV, deep, jagged gouges I hadn't seen before, reminded me it wasn't. Neither did Max, who refused to leave my side for days afterward, his eyes darting at shadows that didn't seem to be there. I started telling myself I'd imagined it. That exhaustion and loneliness had played tricks on me. But then I heard about the others. A retired couple I met weeks later in Oklahoma mentioned it first, how they'd once taken a wrong exit near Fort Smith, how they'd ended up in a deserted campground where someone knocked on their trailer all night. They left before sunrise too, swearing they'd never go back. A younger guy in a Facebook RV group told a similar story. Same area, same name, Dry Creek. He said when he checked maps later, it didn't exist. No record, no coordinates, nothing. I stopped laughing it off after that. Here's what I've learned, and it's the part of this story I can't stress enough. Never, ever ignore your instincts on the road. Don't assume every exit leads somewhere safe. Out there, in those forgotten stretches where cell service dies and maps stop lining up, there are places people don't talk about. Places that don't want you there. And if you hear someone calling for help where no one should be, if the voice doesn't move closer or farther away, if it sounds just a little too perfect, stay inside. Keep the doors locked and don't open them, no matter what. Because some roads aren't meant to be driven twice. And I promise you this, I'll never forget the way that man looked under my headlights. I don't think he was ever alive to begin with. I thought I'd left it behind that night. I wanted to believe it was a fluke, a single, isolated experience that I could lock away in the dark corners of memory and never revisit. But if you spend enough time on the road, long enough weaving between forgotten exits and unmarked highways, you start to see patterns. It wasn't just me. It wasn't just Dry Creek. 2 months later, I was camped outside Flagstaff, Arizona. I joined a small convoy of fellow RV travelers for a week-long trip through the high desert, a loose group of retirees, solo wanderers, and couples who connected through Facebook. Safety in numbers, they said. Strength in community. We camped near Coconino National Forest, and one night around the fire, when the talk turned to strange experiences, I told my story. I expected laughs, maybe polite disbelief, but what I got instead were nods. Silence. That look in someone's eyes when you say something they recognize but never dared to voice aloud. Wrong exit, a woman named Diane said, her voice low. She was in her 50s, traveling alone in a beige Winnebago with faded blue stripes. It happened to me outside Nevada. I was heading to a KOA, but I missed the turn. No GPS out there. I took an exit marked Bluff Road, and she trailed off, staring into the fire. I don't know where I ended up. There was an old motel, sign buzzing like it had power, but the windows were dark. I swear I saw people inside, just standing, staring out, not moving. Her hands trembled around her coffee mug. An older man, Harold, chimed in. Same thing outside Lubbock. Exit took me to a gas station that looked open. I went in to pay. Clerk never spoke. Just watched me, real slow, while I pumped. I turned back. Lights inside were off. Pitch black. I listened, a chill settling deep in my bones. These weren't ghost stories told for fun. These were confessions, pulled from people who didn't want to believe their own words. Later that night, I sat awake in my RV, listening to the desert wind rasp over the roof vents, staring at my road atlas. I started circling highways I'd heard these stories connected to, like knots in a web, stretches where exits seemed to lead nowhere or to places that weren't there when daylight returned. The I-40 corridor near Fort Smith, Highway 93 near Ely, Nevada, US 84 in rural Texas, each one tethered by the same whispered pattern, an unmarked road, no cell service, something wrong on the other side. It made me think back to Dry Creek, how that voice had sounded so human until I listened closely enough to hear it loop. And I wondered, not for the first time, what would have happened if I'd opened that door. A few nights later, Diane told me more of her story, after the others had gone to bed. She said she stayed at that motel parking lot because she was too tired to keep driving. She swore she woke in the night to see a figure standing outside her Winnebago, its face inches from the glass, smiling wider than any human mouth should. By morning, her driver's side mirror was shattered, but there were no footprints in the dirt. That was when it clicked for me. These weren't random. They weren't coincidence. It was like there were places, thin spots almost, where the map bled into something else, where if you took the wrong turn, you weren't just lost, you were somewhere you weren't supposed to be. And then, 2 weeks later, it happened again. I was in New Mexico, cutting across Highway 54, endless stretches of scrubland and sky, nothing but heat haze blurring the horizon. The day had been long, and the sun dipped low enough to turn the world copper. I'd planned to stop in Alamogordo for the night, but fatigue got the better of me. I missed my exit. Again. I didn't even realize it until the pavement narrowed, crumbled at the edges, and a battered sign appeared. Rattlesnake Hill, 10 miles. I laughed bitterly. No GPS. No service. Just like before. I told myself I'd drive 10 miles, turn around, and retrace my route. Simple. But the road twisted into hills and arroyos lined with dead yucca plants and rusting fence posts. By the time I reached what should have been Rattlesnake Hill, my headlights lit up something I can only describe as abandoned civilization. An old gas station, its sign dangling by one hinge. A diner with letters peeled halfway off its facade. Dust-covered cars parked crooked in the lots, doors hanging open like they'd been left mid-escape. And the silence. God, the silence was absolute. Not even wind. I parked, against every instinct screaming otherwise, because I had to see if anyone was there. Max stayed behind, growling low, refusing to leave the RV steps. I walked toward the diner, gravel crunching loud beneath my boots. Inside there were plates of food, half-eaten, coffee cups stained dry, chairs tipped over like everyone left at once, but no people, not a soul. Then I heard it. The faintest sound of a jukebox. A single note, warbling, stretching too long like a record dragged by hand. I backed out slowly, my chest tight, every step deliberate. I climbed into my RV, locked every door, and floored it. I didn't care where the road went. I just drove until I saw pavement that looked alive, until I spotted a highway sign and the faint glow of a distant town. When I checked the next day, there was no Rattlesnake Hill on any map. Not Google, not my atlas, nothing. And that was the moment I knew. This wasn't chance. It wasn't fatigue. Something out there waits for the wrong exit. I couldn't shake it anymore. It wasn't just my story or Diane's or Harold's. It was all of them, strung together like mile markers on roads no sane driver would take twice. Each wrong exit had the same traits, a sign no one remembered seeing before, a dead zone where GPS and service cut out entirely, and that overwhelming silence, the kind that made your own breath sound too loud. I started obsessing. I pored over physical maps, tracing the highways where I'd heard these accounts. I compared them to satellite images late at night, squinting at blurry roads that seemed to vanish into nothing. I even messaged other RV travelers online, asking if they'd ever missed an exit and found themselves somewhere they couldn't explain. Some ignored me, others blocked me, but a few, just a few, wrote back. One was a man named Lewis, a long-haul trucker who'd been on the road for 30 years. His email was short, just a single line. Stay off exit 245 near Abilene. That's where I lost my partner. I called him immediately. He answered on the second ring, voice low and gravelly. He told me how he and his co-driver had taken that exit late one night, looking for diesel. There'd been a station up ahead, lights flickering, pumps intact. His partner got out to swipe their card and never came back. Lewis searched the lot, then the small convenience store attached. Empty. No clerk, no partner. Just gone. He called the cops at dawn. They searched too. No trace. And when they returned weeks later, desperate for answers, there was no exit at all. No sign of the station. Not even a break in the guardrail where the ramp had been. I remember sitting there, phone to my ear, staring at my reflection in the dark window of my RV. Lewis's voice cracked when he said the last thing he'd heard before realizing his partner had vanished. Footsteps circling the truck, too many, too fast, like a dozen people moving at once. I didn't sleep that night. I just lay there listening to the faint hum of the fridge and the occasional rattle of wind against the roof vents wondering how many of us had brushed against these places without even knowing it, wondering if the next wrong exit might be my last. Weeks later, I learned how close that possibility was. I was driving north through Wyoming, wide open plains, sky like a bowl flipped upside down, nothing but grass and fence posts stretching forever. It was late afternoon, that golden hour when the world feels calm and honest. I was relaxed for once, convinced I'd outrun whatever shadow had been nipping at my heels. My tank was full, my route mapped. Then it happened. A sign flashed past. Cold Springs Campground, 1 mile. I didn't remember seeing it on my map. I wasn't planning to stop, but Max whined sharply from the passenger seat, ears flat, eyes locked forward like he'd seen something I hadn't. And then my dashboard went dark. Not just the GPS, everything. Radio, speedometer. Even the headlights dimmed, though the sun was still up. The RV rolled forward as if coasting downhill, engine silent, though I hadn't killed it. Panic clawed at me as I gripped the wheel, foot useless on the gas. The road sloped downward into a stand of bare cottonwoods, their branches clawing at the sky like skeletal fingers. At the bottom of the hill was a campground, or what looked like one. A rusted gate stood wide open. Beyond it were 5 campsites, each with an RV or trailer parked in place. Relief surged through me. Other people. I wasn't alone. I coasted to a stop near the gate and honked, hoping to get someone's attention. No one came out. I honked again. Nothing. I got out. The air was wrong, dead still, heavy with a faint smell like rain on asphalt. I called out, "Hello?" My voice sounded too loud, echoing strangely against nothing. Max refused to leave the RV, whining deep in his throat. I walked toward the first RV. The door was open. Inside were clothes, food, a pair of reading glasses on the counter, a coffee mug, half-drained, sitting beside an open paperback. No people. Every single site was the same. Chairs left pulled out, fires long dead, but ashes still warm to the touch. Even a child's bike lying on its side in the dirt, one wheel still spinning faintly as if someone had been riding it seconds ago. Then I heard it. Footsteps, not mine, not Max's, slow, dragging, coming from behind me. I spun around, flashlight in hand, though the sun hadn't fully set yet. Nothing. The empty road stretched back uphill, framed by those skeletal cottonwoods. My chest tightened, the air felt heavier, thicker, as if the world itself was holding its breath. And then a voice whispered, right next to my ear, "Don't leave." I bolted. I sprinted back to the RV, slammed the door, jammed the key into the ignition, though I knew the engine was dead. And then, miraculously, it roared back to life, dashboard lights flickering like nothing had ever happened. I didn't look back as I tore out of there, not once. When I hit the highway again, the sign for Cold Springs was gone. That night, parked at a well-lit rest stop, surrounded by semi-trucks and tourists, I stared at my hands on the wheel and realized how close I'd come. It wasn't curiosity anymore. It was survival. Those places don't just lure you in. They keep you. And I swear to you, as I sit here telling this, I know this. If I'd hesitated for even a second longer when that voice whispered, I wouldn't be here now. I didn't drive at night anymore, not for weeks. I stuck to daylight travel, busy highways, crowded campgrounds, anywhere I could see people and hear the hum of normal life around me. But fear has a strange way of circling back. The more you run from it, the more it waits for you at the next bend. It was late November, somewhere outside Kansas City, when I finally broke my own rule. A storm had rolled in fast, black clouds swallowing the horizon as dusk fell. The interstate ahead was packed with brake lights from an accident up ahead, so I took the next exit to bypass it. Just a quick detour. I told myself it would save me time. The ramp curled into a frontage road lined with fields drowned in mist. My headlights barely cut 10 feet ahead in the fog. The GPS froze. My phone blinked to no service, and my heart sank. I knew this feeling. The first sign came half a mile later. Welcome to Grayson Hollow. Campground ahead. The lettering looked hand-painted, chipped, and weathered. I didn't remember any such town on the map. I gripped the wheel tighter. My instincts screamed to turn around, but the road had narrowed so sharply I couldn't safely U-turn with the RV. So I kept going, white-knuckled, breath shallow. The fog thickened until I could barely see past my hood. That's when the shapes started appearing. First, in the corners of my headlights, faded outlines of people standing just off the shoulder, their forms swallowed by mist as quickly as they appeared. No faces, no movement, just watching. Max whined loudly, pawing at the passenger window. His hackles bristled. And then I saw it, the campground. At first glance, it almost looked normal, a sign with peeling paint, an entrance lined with those wooden posts you see at state parks, a gravel loop with maybe a dozen empty sites. But at the center of it all was a massive bonfire. Flames roared upward, far too tall, too bright for anything I'd ever seen at a campsite. Figures stood around it in a wide circle, their silhouettes perfectly still against the firelight. I braked hard. My tires crunched to a stop on the gravel, and my headlights fell on them just enough for me to see they weren't right. Their limbs bent at sharp angles, their heads tilted too far, like broken mannequins propped upright. Not one of them moved. My breath fogged the inside of the glass. Max barked wildly, his teeth flashing in the dim light, and then, all at once, they turned. Every figure, in perfect unison. I slammed my foot on the gas. The RV lurched forward, tires spinning on loose gravel before catching traction. The figures began walking toward me, not running, not stumbling, just walking steadily, deliberately, like they knew I couldn't go fast enough on that narrow loop. As I gunned it past them, my headlights caught their faces. They weren't blank like I'd feared. They were worse. Every single one of them had my face, my eyes, my expression twisted in silent screams. I nearly lost control. The road twisted sharp left downhill, and I gripped the wheel so hard my knuckles went white. Behind me, I could hear it, a pounding sound, too many footsteps slamming into the gravel all at once, following. The fog ahead parted suddenly, like a curtain ripped open. There was pavement again. Highway. Signs lit up by my headlights, I-70 eastbound. I didn't question it. I didn't dare look in the mirrors. I shot forward, merging onto the interstate with shaking hands, breath coming in ragged gasps. The pounding footsteps cut home at my tires hit asphalt. I drove until dawn, not stopping, not daring. And when the sun finally rose, washing the plains in pale gold, it felt like I'd survived something I couldn't explain to anyone who hadn't seen it themselves. I pulled into a crowded Love's truck stop, cut the engine, and sat there staring at my reflection in the windshield. Max rested his head on my lap, trembling but alive. I touched my own face, half expecting to feel someone else's skin. And here's what I learned. Those wrong exits, those lost campgrounds and dead towns, they aren't accidents. They're traps. They wait for you to be tired, distracted, convinced it's just another mile of open road. They wear familiarity like a mask, dangling comfort just long enough to pull you in. If you ever see a sign for a place you don't recognize, if the road narrows and the silence deepens, don't go. Miss the turn. Sleep in your RV on the shoulder if you have to, because there are places you can drive into that you can never truly drive out of. And every time I see a faded exit sign now, every time I feel that quiet unease ripple down my spine, I know one thing for certain. Next time, I might not be fast enough. I used to think the sound of silence in the wilderness was comforting. That stillness, that absence of cars or buzzing streetlights, it felt like permission to breathe deeper, like the world had slowed down enough to let me exist without hurry. But silence has edges you don't notice until something pushes against it. A twig snaps. Something brushes against your Volkswagen's thin metal walls. Or worse, you hear a knock. It started as one. Sharp, almost polite. Just after midnight, somewhere in the San Juan National Forest of Colorado, parked deep off a dirt spur road where my GPS gave up, where even the closest ranger station felt imaginary. I'd been on the road for a week in my Volkswagen Westphalia, a white 91 I'd bought off a retired couple who swore it would teach me how to listen to the world again. I don't think they meant it the way it happened for me. That night, the air was cold enough to sting when I breathed. My little propane heater hissed faintly from the passenger footwell. Outside, the wind slid through pine needles in long, low breaths. I'd cracked the window just half an inch because the heater sometimes made me lightheaded, and I wanted that bite of alpine air to keep me sharp. I was alone, which I usually preferred. Fewer variables. No awkward conversations over campfires, no shared decisions about when to move on. Just me, my van, and the quiet. Then, 3 knocks. Not random forest noise, not branches falling or squirrels, distinct, hollow, on metal. I froze where I sat on the bench seat, spoon halfway to my mouth from a can of chili I hadn't bothered to heat properly. It was so faint I wondered if it had come from inside. My first thought was the cabinet behind me, the one with the loose latch, but when I shifted, the sound didn't repeat. The van felt suddenly smaller, its walls paper thin. The knocks came again, same rhythm. I reached instinctively for my flashlight, thumb poised over the switch, but something stopped me. What would I even point it at? I didn't want to open the curtain on the sliding door. That thin separation between me and whatever was outside suddenly felt sacred, untouched. I wanted it to stay that way. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe a branch swinging loose in the wind, maybe the heater vibrating against the floor. I killed the heater, listening hard. The van ticked quietly as it cooled. My breath fogged faintly in the dark. Then came the third set of knocks. Louder this time. Right near the rear panel, where my head had been resting against the cushion not 5 minutes before. I don't remember standing. 1 second I was frozen on the bench. The next I was crouched by the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel like it might steady me. The forest outside was black beyond the narrow glass, my headlights still off. I reached for the keys, then hesitated. Turning on the ignition felt like a declaration, like saying, "I know you're there." The silence stretched. I waited for another knock, but none came. Only the wind threading needles through the branches. I told myself, out loud even, that it had been nothing, that I was overtired, that the altitude was messing with me. My voice sounded small in the van's cabin, like it didn't belong to me. But then I smelled it. At first it was faint, like damp earth, then sharper, acrid, as if something wet had been dragged across a long-forgotten campfire and left to rot. It seeped in through that half-inch gap in the window, and my stomach twisted. I shoved the window shut. The odor clung for what felt like hours. I barely slept, dozing in shallow, restless bursts, every creak of the van snapping me awake. When dawn broke, pale and thin, I forced myself outside. My boots sank softly into frost-stiffened dirt. I walked the perimeter of the van, every muscle braced for what? I didn't know. A bear, maybe, but there were no tracks. No claw marks on the paint. Only one thing stood out, a clean patch on the rear panel, about the size of a hand, where condensation had been wiped away. By then, the smell had vanished. I almost packed up and left right then. But it felt stupid, paranoid. I had driven 12 hours to get here, stocked up on food and water for 3 nights. I told myself, it's just part of camping alone. You hear things differently when it's this quiet. That logic held, at least long enough for me to boil coffee on my little stove, watch steam curl in the cold air, and feel normal again. Until the second night. It started later, closer to 2 a.m., after I'd convinced myself the first night had been an isolated incident. I'd even laughed at myself earlier that evening, parked in the same spot, curtains drawn tight. I'd put on a podcast to drown out the silence. But sometime after midnight, my phone died, and with it, the buffer of human voices. The knocks came softer at first, like fingertips this time, deliberate. I froze mid-breath, my hand hovering over my sleeping bag zipper. My pulse roared in my ears. I whispered, "Hello?" before I could stop myself. The reply came instantly. 3 knocks, same as before. I fumbled for my flashlight, but when I clicked it on, the beam trembled across the ceiling of the van instead of outside. My hands wouldn't steady. I couldn't force myself to look through the window this time. And then footsteps, slow, crunching lightly in the frost, circling the van. I remembered something an old ranger had told me once during a trip to Yellowstone. If it's an animal, you'll hear it wander. Pause. Move off again. If it's a person, you'll hear intention. This was intention. I held my breath so tightly it felt like my chest would split open. The footsteps paused near the sliding door. Whoever, or whatever, was out there didn't move for what felt like an eternity. The silence grew oppressive, almost living, pressing in through the thin walls of my Volkswagen. I could hear the faint ping of cooling metal, the way frost settled into stillness outside. I thought of my keys. They were in the cup holder by the driver's seat. Closed, but to grab them, I'd have to move. Unzip the bag, risk making noise. Another knock. Not on the door this time. This one came from the roof. I jerked upright, hitting my head on the ceiling hard enough to see stars. The sound wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was too close, too impossible. I pictured something crouched up there, crouching in the darkness, waiting. I whispered again, but softer this time. "Who's there?" No answer, just a soft, dragging noise overhead. Like fingertips or claws tracing along the metal. My breath fogged the cold air so fast I thought I might choke on it. And then it stopped. Silence, so sharp it rang in my ears. I didn't move for an hour, maybe longer, clutching my flashlight and staring at the ceiling like I could see through it. The van felt like a coffin. Every muscle in my body ached from holding so still. Finally, when dawn stained the edges of the curtains pink, I bolted upright, grabbed the keys, and started the engine. The sound of it, rough, alive, felt like a lifeline. I didn't even bother folding away the bedding or packing the stove. I just drove, tires crunching hard over frost, steering blind down the dirt road until the forest thinned and I saw pavement again. Only when I hit the highway did I dare pull over to breathe. My hands shook so badly I could barely hold the wheel. I told myself I'd never go back to that spot. I meant it, but I didn't mean to stop camping altogether. 2 weeks later, I didn't even think about it when I parked in Arizona near the Coconino National Forest. A new state, a different landscape, red dust, sparse pines, and cold stars that looked sharp enough to cut. The van sat in a lonely turnout off a dirt road miles from the nearest campground. I'd convinced myself this was better. Open terrain, good visibility. The first night was uneventful. Wind rustling the brush, coyotes yipping somewhere distant, normal wilderness sounds. I almost believed the Colorado incident had been my mind playing tricks on me. The second night, though, I'd just finished eating when I heard it again. 3 knocks, same rhythm. My blood went cold. I sat perfectly still, listening, praying it was some echo, some coincidence. But no, seconds later it came again. Closer this time on the rear hatch. I spun around, staring at the curtain that covered the back window. The smell hit almost instantly. Wet ash, sharp and heavy, like burned wood that had been soaked in rain. I'd never smelled anything like it, except that night in Colorado. "No," I muttered, out loud this time. "No, no, no." The knocks came harder. I lunged forward, slamming my hand on the ignition. The engine roared, headlights slicing across red dirt and scrub. I threw it into gear, gravel spitting under the tires. In my rearview mirror, for the briefest second before the van jolted forward and the view vanished, I swore I saw a figure standing in the wash of my taillights. Too tall, too thin, motionless. I didn't stop driving until I hit Flagstaff, parking under the sodium glow of a gas station sign. I stayed there until morning, engine off, hands locked tight around the wheel. That's when the pattern became clear. Both times, it had been on the second night. Both times, isolated forest roads, miles from anyone else. I thought about turning around, going home, selling the van. But that wasn't me. I needed to know. So I started researching. Forums, old camping threads, Reddit. Buried deep in those endless scrolls of text, I found a post, 6 years old, from a man who described the same thing. Knocks on the second night, an acrid smell, a shape too thin to be human. He called it the second night thing. Said it had followed him from Oregon to Montana. The replies mocked him, but a few didn't. A woman in New Mexico wrote, "It's real. I heard it in Lincoln National Forest. Didn't sleep for 3 days." Someone else mentioned waking up to muddy handprints on their windows near Lake Tahoe. Handprints. The words felt like ice in my veins. I grabbed my flashlight and went outside, circling the van under the fluorescent buzz of that gas station canopy. On the rear hatch, faint but unmistakable, were smudges. Long streaks, like fingers dragged down glass. I couldn't breathe. I didn't tell anyone. Who would believe me? Even I barely did. But I couldn't stop thinking about that first night in Colorado, that quiet hand-shaped patch of wiped condensation. I should have walked away then, sold the van, left it all behind. But instead I drove deeper into the desert. I told myself I needed proof. I picked a spot in Utah this time. Empty BLM land, flat horizon stretching for miles, no cover, no trees. If it came back, I'd see it. That first night was still, cold enough that the air felt like glass. I stayed awake, watching stars sharpen overhead until my neck ached. Nothing happened. But on the second night, it began with a single knock. The single knock was so soft I almost thought I imagined it. It came from the driver's side door this time, low, measured, like someone tapping their knuckles against metal. I sat bolt upright in the dark, my breath freezing in my throat. The desert outside was silent, no wind, no movement, just vast emptiness under a black, star-heavy sky. I waited, my ears straining so hard it hurt. Then it came again. 2 knocks, same rhythm as always. My hand crept toward the curtain, then froze midair. I couldn't do it, couldn't look. My whole body screamed to stay still, to keep the thin fabric between me and whatever was outside. The smell followed, curling in slow and deliberate through the vents I'd cracked for air. Wet ash, rotting, damp earth. It was heavier here, like it had weight, like it was pressing its way inside on purpose. My stomach clenched, and I clamped a hand over my mouth, afraid even my breathing would give me away. A third knock came, sharper now, and I heard it, footsteps, bare by the sound of them, slow, crunching lightly on the packed desert sand. They circled, not rushed, not hurried, like it had all the time in the world. I slid down low in my sleeping bag, clutching my flashlight like a weapon, staring at the ceiling while my heart tried to punch its way out of my chest. Every step outside seemed louder in the stillness, pacing around the van with surgical precision. Then, silence. I almost let out a breath until something scraped against the side panel. It was long and drawn out, like nails dragging along metal. My skin crawled so violently I thought I'd rip myself apart from the inside. I gripped the flashlight tighter, my knuckles white. I whispered again, pathetic, desperate, "Please go." The footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the sounds. It stretched impossibly thin, sharp enough to hurt. Then above me, a faint thump. The roof. It was up there again. The sound was heavier this time, like something crouched low, shifting its weight carefully so the metal wouldn't give. Then the faintest, slowest tapping started, fingertips drumming above my head. I felt every muscle in my body lock. My vision tunneled. I couldn't run, couldn't scream. If I moved, it would know exactly where I was. I bit my lip so hard I tasted blood, just to stay silent. And then, whispering, faint, distorted, just enough to make my skin ice over. Words I couldn't make out, sliding down from above, warped through the cold air. I snapped. My body moved before my brain caught up. I grabbed the keys, twisted them hard. The Volkswagen roared to life. My headlights burst into the darkness, spilling pale beams across flat sand. I floored it, jerking onto the dirt track, tires spinning, heart hammering loud enough to drown everything else out. I didn't stop. Not until I hit the highway, hours later, the sun just beginning to crawl up over the horizon. My hands ached from gripping the wheel. My throat burned from breathing so fast. When I finally pulled into a rest stop, I forced myself to look. The roof was streaked with prints, faint, oily smudges, 5 long marks, dragging like claws or fingers. I scrubbed them clean in a panic. I couldn't bear to see them. But even after they were gone, I could still smell it, faint, lingering in the fabric of the curtains, in the vents in my clothes, wet ash and earth. I didn't camp again for weeks. I slept in parking lots, truck stops, anywhere lit and loud. I told myself it was over, that it couldn't follow me everywhere, but it did. The next time it came, I wasn't even deep in the wilderness. I was in Nevada, near a designated campsite off a state highway. Other RVs parked nearby. I thought the company would make me feel safer. That night, I heard it again. The knocks. 3 this time, clear as day, even with other campers just 50 feet away. I leapt to the front seat, fumbling the ignition, headlights sweeping over the neighboring RVs. But no one stirred. No one opened a door or flicked on a light, like they hadn't heard a thing. The smell filled my van. Thick, suffocating, and then something new. A voice. Low, ragged, right outside the door. It said my name. Hearing your name spoken in the middle of nowhere, when you know you're alone, is a kind of fear that doesn't just live in your chest. It roots in your spine. It spreads to your fingers, your teeth, the hollow behind your eyes. That's where it hit me. It didn't even sound human. The voice was warped, like it had been dragged through a mile of static. Drawn out vowels. My name stretched thin, syllables slurred in ways a throat shouldn't bend. I couldn't stop shaking. My hand hovered over the door handle, my brain screaming at me to do something, drive, scream, anything. But all I could do was sit there, paralyzed, listening to the scrape of something against the metal just inches away. Then came the knock. 1, 2, 3. I lost it. I slammed the ignition, engine roaring to life, headlights flooding the campsite. The smell hit even harder, thick, wet ash and burned dirt, filling the cabin so fast I gagged. And then I saw it. For a split second, in the beam of my high beams, something standing between 2 other RVs. Thin, too thin. Its arms hung too low, its head cocked to one side. Its skin, or what I thought was skin, looked stretched, pale and reflective like moonlight on water. I blinked, and it was gone. I didn't even look back. I floored it, gravel spitting behind me, headlights bouncing wildly across the road. The van rattled like it was coming apart, my breath tearing ragged out of my chest. In the mirror, I swore I saw movement, a shadow slipping along the edge of my taillights, faster than it should have been able to move. I pushed the pedal harder. The van groaned but held on. I drove until my hands went numb from gripping the wheel, until my vision blurred from exhaustion and fear. Finally, in the middle of nowhere, I pulled over on the side of the highway. The sun was just starting to smear gray light across the horizon. For a moment, I thought I was safe. And then, faintly, from the back panel of the van, knock, knock, knock. I screamed, spun in my seat so fast I nearly dislocated my shoulder, flashlight beams slicing through the cabin. Nothing. The curtains didn't move. The glass was clear. I sat there hyperventilating, staring at the ceiling until my vision spotted black. My head pounded. And then silence again. That silence stayed with me. Hours passed, daylight spilling bright and harsh over the empty road. Cars finally started passing, oblivious. Normal life carried on while I sat there, trapped in a van that smelled faintly of rot and smoke. That day, I drove into Las Vegas, parked in a packed casino lot, and sat inside the van without moving for 12 hours. People bustled past. No one knew. No one looked twice. I thought about calling someone, anyone, but what would I say? That something followed me across 3 states? That it knew my name? By nightfall, I'd decided I was done. I'd sell the van. Fly home. Forget this trip ever happened. That night, parked under the glow of neon signs and the endless noise of the strip, I finally slept. I woke at 2:13 a.m., knock, 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 right against the driver's side glass. I sat up so fast I smacked my head on the roof. The smell hit instantly, chokingly thick, curling up from nowhere. My breath hitched, and then I heard it. That voice. Let me in. Not loud, not angry, just patient. The casino lights outside glared bright through the windshield. People walked past. They didn't even look over. I lunged forward, pressed my forehead against the glass, desperate to see, but there was nothing. No shadow, no figure. Just the endless glow of the parking lot, too bright and too empty all at once. I slammed the horn. No one flinched. Not a single head turned. And then I felt it. A handprint. Pressing from the inside, right against the glass, next to my face. I tore out of that parking lot so fast I nearly sideswiped a pickup. My hands were shaking too badly to steer straight. The mark stayed there, oily, smeared, 5 too long fingers splayed wide, until the wind stripped it away at 80 miles an hour. I didn't stop until I hit the outskirts of Death Valley, the empty desert yawning wide and endless. And that's when I realized something that turned my blood to ice. It wasn't chasing me anymore. It was with me. I couldn't comprehend it at first. The idea clawed its way through my head, slow and undeniable. I hadn't escaped it by driving. I'd brought it with me. The smell never left now. It seeped from the upholstery, from the vents, from the very seams of the van's thin metal shell. Wet ash, burned soil. Sometimes faintly, like damp hair left to rot. I drove with every window cranked down, desert winds slicing through at 70 miles per hour, but it clung. I stopped eating. I stopped sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard it, the soft knocking somewhere inside the van. Not outside anymore. Inside, sometimes near the cabinets, sometimes from the floor beneath my feet, and always, just before I woke fully, the whisper of my name. By the third night in Death Valley, I was raw, hollowed out from fear and exhaustion. I pulled into a dry lake bed off an unmarked road, flat and empty for miles. No trees, no cover, just me, my van, and a horizon stretched thin enough to break. I parked there because I wanted to see it coming, if it came. I sat awake until the sky turned black and diamond-pricked with stars. I counted every single noise, the tick of cooling metal, the wind's low groan through vents, the occasional shifting of sand outside. I told myself that if I could catalog every sound, I'd know when something was wrong. It was around 3:17 a.m. when I heard it. A knock. But this time, not sharp. Dull, like something hitting the floor from beneath. I froze, staring down at my boots braced against the van's rubber mats. The knock came again, soft, rhythmic, like something moving under the van. I dropped to my knees, flashlight shaking in my grip. I pressed my ear to the floor. The sound was louder there, hollow, as if something inside the very frame was knocking back. I whispered, trembling, "What do you want?" Silence. Then, slowly, 3 knocks. I lurched upright, panic clawing at my throat. I scrambled to the back doors and yanked them open, flashlight beam cutting across the pale sand. Nothing. No footprints. No shadow beneath the van. Just emptiness. And then, whispering. Not outside, behind me. I spun, flashlight slashing across the cabinets. The curtains were still drawn. The air reeked so thick I gagged. And there on the ceiling above the bed, I saw it, a handprint, pressed outward from inside the metal. I staggered back, hit my head on the doorframe, nearly dropped the light. The handprint dragged slowly, painfully, scraping along the ceiling like it was pushing against thin steel. I didn't think. I dove forward, slammed the driver's seat, twisted the ignition so hard I nearly snapped the key. The van roared. I floored it, bouncing over rough ground, the entire frame rattling. The handprint stayed above me, sliding toward the windshield. I couldn't breathe, my chest locked. The whispering rose, louder now, spilling from every angle, inside the cabinets, under the floor, crawling through the vents. My name over and over, warped and broken. And then it laughed. The sound was wrong. Wet. Like it was choking even as it forced itself through. The roof buckled. A dent formed just above the windshield, deepening with each second, metal groaning like it would tear. I screamed, slamming the gas pedal to the floor, tires clawing at sand, my vision blurred. The world tunneled into headlights and black sky. Suddenly, the knock stopped. The whispering cut out. The smell thinned in an instant, like it had been sucked out into the night. I didn't slow down. Not for miles. When I finally stopped, shaking uncontrollably, dawn was bleeding across the desert. The van was silent. The ceiling dent remained, ugly and warped, but no prints, no smell, no sound. For the first time in weeks, I felt alone again, truly alone. I sat there in the stillness, tears stinging hot down my face, gripping the wheel so tight I thought it might crack. That's when I saw it, in the rearview mirror. A figure, sitting in the back seat, too tall, bent awkwardly, head cocked against the ceiling, skin pale, stretched, glistening faintly in the early light. Its hands, too long, rested lightly against its knees. It smiled. I couldn't move, couldn't blink. My lungs locked so tight, I thought I'd suffocate right there, staring at that thing in the mirror. Its smile didn't move. Its eyes, if they were eyes, were just pits, blacker than anything outside. No reflection, no light, just absence. Every survival instinct I had screamed to get out. but I couldn't open the door, couldn't even reach for it. My hand hovered inches from the handle, trembling so violently I thought my bones would rattle apart. It shifted slightly and the van creaked. The smell hit again, wet ash and earth so thick it coated my tongue. Then it spoke, not in my ears, not even in the air. It bloomed directly in my head, curling like smoke through every thought I had left. You brought me here. I choked, voice cracking like a splintered beam. What are you? It didn't answer. It tilted its head, slow and deliberate, and then I heard it. 3 knocks. From inside my skull. I snapped. My body lurched forward before I even registered moving, hand wrenching the door open so violently it slammed back on its hinges. I threw myself into the desert, boots hitting sand so hard I felt the impact tear through my knees. The cold morning air ripped at my lungs, but I didn't stop. I ran. Past the van, past the tracks it had left, just running blind into the endless flat nothing. My heart was a drum so loud I barely heard my own ragged screams. Behind me, the Volkswagen's door slammed shut. I risked one glance back. The van's headlights flicked on, though I'd killed the engine. They flared bright, glaring like eyes in the pale dawn. Inside, through the windshield, I saw it move, its head tilting toward me, one hand pressing to the glass. 5 fingers. Too long. It didn't come out. It didn't chase me. It just sat there, watching. I ran until my legs gave out, collapsing hard onto the cold, packed dirt. By the time I staggered to my feet again, the van was gone. No tracks. No tire marks. Nothing. I walked for hours. The sun rose high, blistering my skin, until I finally stumbled onto a road, some nameless strip of blacktop cutting through the desert. A trucker picked me up. I must have looked half feral, covered in sweat and sand, but he didn't ask questions. He just drove, radio low, while I sat there shaking, staring out the window like if I blinked, I'd see it again. I told him I'd lost my van. He nodded, like that was enough, but I didn't lose it. It left me. That was 3 months ago. I haven't camped since, haven't slept in anything but a motel bed under buzzing fluorescent lights. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear it. 3 knocks. Not outside anymore, not in the van, in the walls of the room. I'll sit there in the dark, staring at the door, and the smell creeps in, faint, barely there, but unmistakable. Wet ash. And I think about what it said. You brought me here. I replay every mile I drove, every quiet turnout, every second night alone in the wilderness. Did I summon it by ignoring my instincts, by rationalizing every sound away, or had it always been there, waiting for someone stubborn enough to keep coming back? Here's what I've learned. If you hear knocking in the wild, leave. Don't wait. Don't search for answers. Don't test it like I did. Because once it's inside, you don't get rid of it. You live with it. And maybe that's the real danger of camping out there alone. It's not the bears or the cold or getting lost. What you bring back with you, the things the silence lets in, the things that knock politely before they decide to stay. I can still feel it now, lingering just out of sight, not in the room, not even in the walls, deeper in me. And some nights, I swear, when the world is quiet enough, I hear it knocking from somewhere I can't escape. I've spent years on the road, living out of my RV, learning every curve of the highways that run through America's forgotten corners. And I can tell you this, it's not the crowded campgrounds or the well-lit national parks you should worry about. It's the empty ones, the places where the picnic tables are half rotted, where the office is locked up and the faded sign still sways in the wind. The RV parks left behind by time where you pull in and wonder, why did they close this down? I used to think I understood why those places attracted rumors. A creepy story here, a whispered legend there, just bored travelers spicing up a dull stopover. But I don't think that anymore. Now, when I hear someone joke about a deserted RV park being haunted, I get quiet, because I've stayed in one. And what happened there changed the way I see every shadow at the edge of my campfire. It was last fall. I'd been traveling through western Arizona, chasing the kind of silence you can only find in the desert. The weather was perfect, cool at night, warm during the day, and I had an old route planned out that would take me from Quartzsite down toward Yuma. Along the way, I found this place on an old RV forum. Copper Ridge RV Park, closed since 2003, still accessible. There were grainy photos from before it shut down. A handful of gravel pads, a concrete bathhouse, a few palms growing out of the sand. I should have known better. Even reading that name, Copper Ridge, stirred something in me. I'd heard it before. A friend of mine, years ago, told me about a ridge somewhere in Arizona where travelers disappeared. But back then, I brushed it off as another campfire story. Still, curiosity has a way of winning. When I pulled off the highway and onto the access road, the first thing I noticed was the silence. No traffic, no birds, just wind dragging grit across the asphalt. The sign for Copper Ridge was still there, sun-bleached to the point where you could barely read it. Half a mile in, I reached a rusted gate that hung wide open, its chain dangling like someone had cut it years ago. The place wasn't as ruined as I expected. The pads were overgrown with weeds, and the bathhouse door was padlocked, but everything looked untouched, like people just left one day and never came back. There were still faded lawn chairs at a few of the sites, a broken lantern hanging from a post. It was the kind of quiet that made your skin crawl. I parked near the far end, where a lone mesquite tree cast a crooked shadow over the gravel. It was late afternoon, sun dropping low, and I told myself I'd only stay the night, just to see what it felt like. That evening, I cooked dinner outside and watched the desert turn gold and then blue, the horizon swallowing the last light. And for a while, it was peaceful, until I heard it. A voice. It was faint, like someone calling from far away, but it wasn't a word I recognized. Just a single, drawn-out sound, carried on the wind. I froze, spatula in hand, and scanned the empty lots. Nothing. No vehicles, no movement, nothing but the skeletal outlines of palms swaying against the twilight. I told myself it was just wind. You know how it gets in the desert, how it whistles through gaps in the rocks, how it can sound like anything if you're tired enough. I shoved the thought down, cleaned up dinner, and locked myself inside the RV. But around midnight, I woke up, not from a nightmare, just this feeling, this weight in the air. It was colder than it should have been. My breath fogged faintly in the dark. That's when I heard it again. The voice. Closer this time. Not a shout, not quite a whisper either. Just there. Like someone talking from right outside my window, low and steady. I didn't move. I just sat up slowly, listening, every muscle rigid. The sound had no rhythm, no pattern I could latch onto. And then, this is the part I still can't explain, I realized I'd heard it before. Not here. Not in Arizona. But years ago, camped near Mount Rainier, when I woke in the middle of the night to what I thought was wind bending through the trees. The same sound, the same lilt to it, even though it wasn't any language I knew. I gripped my phone, ready to turn on the flashlight, but I hesitated. Because deep down, I didn't want to see what was out there. I sat there until it stopped. When I finally slept again, I dreamt I was standing at the park entrance, staring at the rusted gate. Only it wasn't open anymore. The chain was wound tight, locked shut. Behind me, the pads were filled, not with RVs, but with shadowy shapes standing perfectly still, their faces turned toward me. At dawn, I shook it off. Told myself it was just a dream brought on by nerves. That's what we do out here, right? We rationalize. You hear a branch snap in the dark, you say it's just a raccoon. You see something move on the ridge, you tell yourself it's a deer. Because the alternative, that it's something else entirely, isn't something you're prepared to face. I made coffee and stepped outside. That's when I noticed the footprints. They circled my RV. Not boots, not sneakers. Bare feet. Dozens of them, pressed faintly into the dirt and gravel, spiraling inward toward my door. I didn't pack up right away. I should have, but I didn't. Instead, I walked the park. Every site was empty, every fire ring cold. But halfway down the row, near an old picnic table, I saw something etched into the concrete. A symbol. It was crude, scratched deep with a knife or something sharp. 3 lines converging in the center, like a crooked star. I knew it. I'd seen it once before. in a video online about strange carvings in abandoned parks across the Southwest. That video doesn't exist anymore. I tried to find it later, but every link is dead, like it was erased. I stared at that mark for a long time. My skin felt electric, my nerves buzzing like they knew something I didn't. And then, from behind me, I heard gravel crunch. I spun around so fast I nearly tripped, heart slamming in my chest. Nothing. Just the empty lot stretching back toward my RV, the sun still low enough to cast long, twisting shadows across the gravel. But I knew I'd heard it, clear as day, the sound of stepping on loose stone. I stood there, holding my breath, listening. Silence. The kind of silence that feels alive, like it's listening back. I forced myself to move, one slow step at a time, scanning the ground. No fresh prints, no signs of movement. The only ones I could see were those faint bare footprints circling my rig, and even those looked blurred, half erased by the wind. I told myself I was done. I'd pack up and leave, no breakfast, no lingering. Just throw it all in the RV and hit the road. But when I got back to my site, something stopped me cold. The door to my RV was open. Not wide, just a crack, enough that I could see the dark slit where it hadn't latched. Now, I know I locked it. I'm obsessive about that. Triple-checking the deadbolt, even when I'm parked somewhere safe. But standing there in the cold morning light, staring at that door, I started to doubt myself. Maybe I was tired. Maybe I hadn't turned it all the way. I climbed inside, slow and careful, half expecting someone to be crouched in the shadows. But it was empty. Everything exactly where I left it. Except for one thing. On the counter right by the sink was a strip of paper torn from an old map. The edges were yellowed and curling, the ink faded but still legible. It showed a grid of desert roads, and in the corner was a handwritten note in thin, shaky letters. "You've been here before." I swear my stomach dropped straight through the floor, because I had seen that stretch of road before. Not in person, but in a file I'd saved years ago, back when I was obsessed with reading about strange places people avoided. A blog post called The Ridge Route that talked about forgotten campgrounds, desert ghost towns, places where GPS coordinates didn't line up with real roads. That post vanished not long after I bookmarked it. I'd assumed the site got taken down. I didn't touch the paper. I didn't want to. Instead, I packed. Fast. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped the coffee pot trying to dump it. Every few seconds I glanced at the window, half expecting to see someone standing outside. By the time I fired up the engine, the sun had climbed higher, but it didn't feel any warmer. The whole park seemed frozen, like the air was trapped, stale and unmoving. As I rolled past the entrance, I slowed just enough to glance at the gate. It was closed, chained. I hit the brakes, staring. I hadn't touched it. It was wide open when I drove in yesterday, and now it was bound shut with a heavy chain looped 3 times around the posts, padlock gleaming in the morning light. For a second, I considered getting out, but every nerve in my body screamed, "Don't." I slammed the gas instead, swerving hard onto the dirt shoulder, bouncing over a dry wash until I reached the road on the other side. When I looked back in the mirror, the gate was gone. Not closed, not chained, just gone. I didn't stop driving until I reached a gas station 20 miles out, the kind of roadside spot where truckers park overnight. I sat there in my RV, engine off, hands gripping the wheel so tight they hurt. That's when I noticed my phone. It had been recording. I don't remember opening the voice memo app, but there it was, a file saved at 12:43 a.m., just around the time I woke up to that voice outside. I played it. At first, it was just static, thin and distant, like wind dragging sand across metal. But then came that sound, the same low, steady tone I'd heard the night before, only this time layered under it were words. They were faint, but I could make them out. "You're late." I shut it off, deleted it instantly. I don't know why. Instinct, maybe, like keeping it would make it worse. I didn't sleep much the next few nights. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those bare footprints spiraling around my RV. I heard that crunch of gravel. That voice, dragging out syllables that didn't belong in any language I know. A week later, I mentioned it to a guy at a campground near Tucson. He was older, wiry, the kind who looked like he'd been living on the road for decades. When I told him I'd stayed at Copper Ridge, he froze mid-sip of his coffee. "Still standing, huh?" he said quietly. "Thought they bulldozed that place years back." I asked him what he meant, but he just shook his head. "Don't go back there," he said. Places like that, they ain't empty. They're waiting. Then he walked away, leaving his coffee half full on the table. I keep thinking about that, about the map scrap with those words, "You've been here before," about that locked gate and how it vanished when I looked back. And I keep wondering, was Copper Ridge really abandoned, or was I the only one who left? I stayed restless for days after that. Even when I parked in busy campgrounds with families and kids running between sites, I couldn't shake the feeling that Copper Ridge was still watching me. Like I'd left something behind there, or worse, like something had followed me out. It's strange how fear settles in. It's not loud at first. It's quiet, subtle. I'd catch myself double-checking the locks before bed, waking up at 3:07 a.m., the same time every night, for no reason at all. Some nights I'd swear I heard gravel shifting outside, even though I was camped on solid pavement. It was around that time I found something on my windshield. I'd parked overnight at a full-service RV park outside Gila Bend, surrounded by other rigs. In the morning, there was a slip of paper tucked under my wiper. No note, no handwriting, just a printed photograph. It was my RV, parked at Copper Ridge, taken from a distance, probably near the gate. But here's the part that chilled me to the bone. It was taken at night. I stared at it for so long my hands went numb. I hadn't seen anyone out there. I hadn't heard a car, hadn't spotted a flashlight beam in the dark. Whoever took it must have been standing out there in that dead silence watching me while I slept. I went straight to the office and asked if anyone had been by my site. The manager, a big guy with a weathered face, looked at me like I was crazy. "No one comes in here without a reservation," he said. "Cameras would have caught him." I asked if I could see the footage. He hesitated, then took me into the back office. We rewound through the night. Nothing. No cars, no people walking by, nothing at all. But when the timestamp hit 3:07 a.m., the feed glitched. Just static for 20 seconds before snapping back. I left that park before sundown. After that, I started digging. I couldn't help it. I went back through old forums, archived posts, anything that mentioned Copper Ridge or abandoned RV parks like it. That's when I found a thread from 2008 on a site called NomadNet. It was mostly dead links, but one post stood out. Open quote, "They all connect somehow. Copper Ridge, Mesa Hollow, Black Vine Junction. Look at the maps. Same pattern, same symbol. Don't go alone." Close quote. The user who posted it, Wanderer77, never replied to anyone. I clicked their profile. Deleted. No trace. I pulled up a map, like they said. Found Copper Ridge. Then Mesa Hollow. Closed since the late 90s. Then Black Vine Junction, another shuttered park up near Utah. When I pinned them, my blood ran cold. They formed a shape. Not a perfect one, but close enough. 3 lines converging in the center. The same star-like symbol I'd seen carved into that concrete table at Copper Ridge, and right in the center of that rough triangle, a blank stretch of desert. No towns, no highways, just unmarked land. I don't know what got into me, but I couldn't stop staring at that spot. Zooming in and out on satellite view, dragging the map around even though it was nothing but dust and rock. And yet, every time I looked at it, I felt this pull, like I'd driven past it before. Like it was familiar somehow. 2 nights later, I had another dream. I was back at Copper Ridge, only this time it was daytime. I walked between the empty pads, past the bathhouse, toward the far end where the ground dipped slightly. And there, at the base of the mesquite tree where I'd parked, was a door. Not a hatch, not a cellar entrance. An actual door, upright in the ground, framed by weathered wood, no walls on either side. That's when I woke up. The next morning, there was dust on my floor. Fine, reddish grit, like the kind that clings to your tires after driving through dry washes. I hadn't tracked anything in. My shoes were by the door, clean. But there it was, a faint trail of footprints leading from the door of the RV to my bed. Bare feet. I didn't tell anyone about that. How could I? People would say I was sleepwalking, hallucinating, losing it from too many nights alone in strange places. But I know what I saw, and here's the part I can't shake. That smell. It was faint, almost metallic, like wet copper. I'd smelled it at Copper Ridge. I'd smelled it once before that, too. Years back in Washington, camping near Mount Rainier, when I woke up to find fresh dirt on my doormat and couldn't explain it. It's always the same smell. And I keep hearing the same phrase in my head, over and over, though I don't know why. You've been here before. I started marking my calendar, logging everything. Every footprint, every dream, every sound in the night. And when I flipped back through, I noticed something that stopped me cold. Every strange thing, every footprint, every time my phone glitched or I woke up at 3:07, it all lined up with those three locations. Copper Ridge, Mesa Hollow, Blackvine Junction. Like I'd been circling them without realizing it. I don't think it's random anymore. I think these places are connected, and I don't think they're just abandoned. I couldn't take it anymore. I told myself I'd just drive out there to that blank spot in the middle of the triangle, just to see. Maybe if I stared it down, if I saw it for what it really was, a patch of dirt and rock, it would lose its hold on me. So I packed up, fueled the RV, and headed north. The closer I got, the emptier the road became. Gas stations thinned out, cell signal dropped. By the time I turned off the last marked highway, it felt like I'd driven into another century. Dust devils spun across the flats, low hills rising a distance like sleeping animals. There was no official turnoff, just a faint track through the sand, barely wide enough for my RV. My GPS screen glitched, froze, then went blank. I should have stopped. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around. But I kept going. About an hour in, I saw it. A rusted sign half buried in sand. Letters so faded you could barely read them. But they were there. Mesa Hollow RV Park. I'd found one of the points. The place was even more decayed than Copper Ridge. Pads swallowed by weeds, utility poles leaning at odd angles. The bathhouse had collapsed in on itself, roof caved in like a crushed skull. I stepped out of the RV, boots crunching on gravel, and the heat hit me like a wall. And then silence. No wind, no bugs, just an oppressive, heavy stillness. I walked the perimeter, my eyes scanning every corner. That's when I saw it, another symbol carved into the concrete by the old office. Same three converging lines. This one deeper, fresher somehow, like someone had made it not long ago. A sound broke the air then, footsteps, not loud, just steady, slow. From behind the ruined bathhouse, I froze. Hello, I called out, voice cracking more than I wanted it to. No answer, just footsteps. Crunch, crunch, crunch. I started backing toward my RV. My hands were slick on the door handle when I saw him. An old man, wiry and sunburned, wearing a torn denim jacket and a wide-brimmed hat. He stopped about 20 feet away, head tilted slightly like he was studying me. "You lost?" he asked. His voice was hoarse, like gravel dragged over rusted metal. I swallowed hard. "Just passing through." He chuckled low, like I told a joke. "Nobody just passes through Mesa Hollow." My gut tightened. "You live out here?" He didn't answer right away. He just squinted at me, then pointed to the horizon. "You're headed to the center, ain't you?" I froze. "What?" He grinned, wide and toothless. "They all do. Don't matter if they mean to or not." Before I could ask what he meant, he turned and walked off, straight into the collapsed bathhouse. I swear on my life, he didn't climb over rubble. He didn't squeeze through any gap. He just stepped through the broken wall and vanished. I bolted into the RV, slammed the lock, and fired up the engine so fast I nearly flooded it. My hands shook as I cranked the wheel, gravel spitting from the tires. I didn't look back. Not once. But as I drove away, I caught something in my rearview mirror, a figure standing in the road behind me, too far to see clearly, and just for a second I swear it looked like me. By the time I reached the coordinates at the center of the triangle, it was late afternoon. The road narrowed to nothing, just hard-packed sand and scattered stones. Then, all at once, there it was, A flat stretch of land, no buildings, no signs of life, just a single object sticking out of the ground. A door, exactly like the one from my dream. Freestanding, upright, weathered wood frame around a slab of peeling white paint. No walls, no hinges visible. Just a door in the middle of nowhere. I killed the engine. My chest felt tight. The desert air shimmered with heat, but I swear it felt cold on my skin. I don't know why I got out. Every nerve in me screamed not to, but I walked toward it anyway, boots crunching on sand. I reached out, and then I heard it again. That voice. Low, steady, like wind pushing syllables that weren't meant for human mouths. This time I understood. Not the words exactly, but the meaning. You've been here before. The smell hit next. Copper, sharp and metallic, thick in my throat. My fingers brushed the door's surface. It was freezing. I hesitated. Then it moved. Not a lot, just a fraction, like something on the other side had pulled gently at it. And in that sliver of a gap, I saw something. Not darkness, not light, just movement. Shapes shifting, twisting, like watching reflections in water that wasn't there. Then it slammed shut. The sound ripped through the air so hard I stumbled back, my vision blurred, ears ringing. When I blinked, the door was gone. Just flat, empty desert. I staggered backward, gasping for air like I'd been underwater. The desert was dead silent again, the kind of silence that presses in until you feel your own heartbeat in your skull. I spun in a slow circle, scanning every inch of that empty horizon. The door was gone, just gone. No marks in the sand, no sign it had ever been there at all. But I wasn't alone. I felt it before I saw it, this creeping awareness, like eyes dragging across my back. I turned sharply toward the RV, and that's when I saw them. Footprints, not just one set, dozens, bare, human, leading away from my RV and circling outward like ripples in a pond. They weren't there when I arrived. They hadn't been there a minute ago, and all of them stopped abruptly, mid-step, as if whoever left them had simply vanished. I bolted for the RV door. My keys fumbled in my hands, slipping from my grip and clattering against the metal steps. That's when I heard it. The crunch of sand behind me. I didn't look. I didn't want to look. I grabbed the keys, threw myself inside, and locked the door in one frantic motion. My chest heaved, pulse hammering. Then something knocked. Not loud, not frantic. Just a soft, steady tap, tap, tap on the side panel near the window. I froze. The sound moved, circling slowly, dragging along the aluminum like fingertips trailing against glass. Tap, tap, tap. I could hear it on the rear now, then the other side, then back by the door. I sat there, clutching the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Then, clear as day, a voice right outside the door. "You're late." It was the same tone from my phone recording. Low, unhurried, too calm. I jammed the keys in the ignition and floored it. The tires spun in loose sand before catching, the RV fishtailing as I tore away from that empty stretch of land. My hands trembled so badly I could barely keep the wheel steady. In the rearview mirror, I saw something standing where the door had been. A figure. Too far to see details, but it didn't move. It just stood there watching until the heat shimmer swallowed it from view. I drove for hours without stopping. Didn't care about fuel, didn't care about my route. I just wanted distance between me and that place. By the time I pulled into a small roadside lot and killed the engine, the sky was ink black and my body was trembling with exhaustion. I locked every door, every window, pulled every blind shut, and sat there in the dark, listening. That's when I noticed it. On the passenger seat, folded neatly, was another strip of yellowed map paper. I hadn't heard anyone come in. I hadn't left the RV unlocked. This one had no roads on it, just a single hand-drawn symbol, the same 3 converging lines, and beneath it, written in the same thin, shaky letters, "Next time, don't run." I wanted to throw it out, burn it, anything. But I couldn't bring myself to touch it. I sat there staring until I noticed something else. Something I wish I hadn't. The smell. Copper. Sharp and faint, but unmistakable, seeping from nowhere and everywhere all at once. And then, under the low hum of the RV's fridge, I heard breathing. Not mine. Slow, measured, from the rear of the RV. I spun in my seat, every muscle locked, but the hallway to the back was pitch black. I didn't move. Couldn't. That breathing stayed steady like whoever, or whatever. Didn't care that I knew it was there. I reached for my flashlight with a shaking hand, thumbed it on, and cast the beam down the narrow corridor. Empty. But the smell was stronger now, metallic and cold, like the air in the RV itself had turned sour. I slept in the driver's seat that night, engine running, headlights pointed toward the dark highway ahead. By dawn, the breathing had stopped. I didn't turn around again until I reached another populated RV park. This one bustling with weekenders and retirees who had no idea what kind of hell was stalking their world's edges. But even in that bright daylight, surrounded by people, I couldn't shake the feeling. Every shadow looked too deep. Every sound carried too long. And later, when I finally worked up the courage to check the back of the RV, I found something scratched faintly into the inside of the door. Not carved, just traced lightly, like a fingertip dragged through dust. You've been here before. I didn't leave my RV for 2 days after that. I stayed parked at that busy campground like it was my last lifeline to reality, surrounded by laughter, clinking beer bottles, the smell of charcoal grills and diesel fumes. But no amount of noise could drown out what I felt creeping in the quiet between moments. The certainty that what happened in Copper Ridge and Mesa Hollow hadn't stayed there. It was with me now. I checked the locks a dozen times an hour, but still, every so often I'd catch a sound, a faint tap, tap, tap on the siding, soft enough I couldn't be sure if I imagined it. Sometimes in the middle of conversations with strangers, I'd catch a scent, sharp and metallic, rising from nowhere. And always at 3:07 a.m., I woke. Every single night. The third night in, I broke. I pulled out my laptop and dug deeper than I'd ever dared before. Private archives, dead links resurrected by old cache mirrors, forgotten forums where half the threads were cryptic ramblings that barely made sense. And that's when I saw it. A post titled, "Why Deserted RV Parks Attract Dark Urban Legends." No username, no date, just text grainy and warped like it had been copied too many times. Open quote. They don't attract legends. They make them. Every abandoned park is a marker, a point in a pattern older than any map you've seen. They pull you in because they know you've already been there, because you'll always go back. The footprints are yours, the voice is yours, the smell is blood, old and iron heavy. They're not haunted by the past, they're haunted by the future. Close quote. And then at the bottom, open quote, "If you've read this, it's already too late," close quote. The screen flickered. My Wi-Fi cut out. When it came back, the post was gone. I slammed the laptop shut. My heart felt like it was going to tear through my chest. And then, from the back of the RV, I heard it, that same breathing. Slow, steady. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. I started the engine and pulled out of that campground without looking back. I drove until the sun was high and my tank was near empty. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to keep moving. But the road stretched endlessly ahead, shimmering in the heat, the kind of horizon that never seems to get closer. Somewhere past noon, I saw it. A sign. Rusted, barely legible, but there, Black Vine Junction RV Park. The third point on the map. I didn't want to stop. Every fiber of me screamed to keep driving, but my hands turned the wheel on their own, like they already knew where I was headed. The park was almost identical to the others. Rows of empty pads, decaying hookups, an office with its windows long shattered. But this one had something different. In the center of the park was a single unburned campfire ring. And sitting there cross-legged in the ashes was the old man I'd seen at Mesa Hollow. He looked up at me and smiled, that same toothless grin. "Took you long enough," he rasped. I didn't speak. Couldn't. He gestured to the ground beside him. "Come sit. You've got questions." I should have run, but I didn't. I stepped closer, boots crunching on the brittle earth. "What is this?" I managed. He chuckled, low and rattling. "You already know. You've been here before." I shook my head violently. "No, I've never—" "Think." His smile widened. "That dream, the footprints, the door. You've walked this loop more times than you remember." "What loop?" He pointed at the dirt between us, dragging his finger through the ashes to draw that same symbol, 3 lines converging in the center. "It doesn't end," he said simply. "You keep running, but every road bends back. Every park brings you closer, till you open the door." I stared at him. My mouth went dry. "I saw the door," I whispered. "Did you open it?" I hesitated. "No." His grin faded. He leaned forward, eyes dark as coal. "Next time," he rasped. "Don't run." The air shifted. That copper tang burned in my throat. The world around me rippled like heat haze. And then, just for an instant, I wasn't at Blackvine Junction anymore. I was back at Copper Ridge. The pads were full now, lined with RVs, but they weren't right. Their windows were too dark, their doors wide open. Figures stood in the shadows, silent, still, watching. I spun, and there was Mesa Hollow. Then Blackvine, then all three at once, collapsing inward like folding paper until everything converged on a single point, the door. Right in front of me. I didn't remember walking toward it. My hand was already reaching out. I heard the voice, not from outside this time, but from inside my head. "You've been here before." The door opened. And then I woke up, in my RV, parked on the shoulder of a highway I didn't recognize. The clock read 3:07 a.m. My hands were filthy, caked with reddish dust. My shoes were by the door, damp with morning dew that hadn't come yet. On the counter was another map scrap. Same shaky handwriting, same message. Next time. I don't camp in abandoned parks anymore. Not because I'm afraid, because I don't trust that it would matter. I've stopped trying to escape the pattern. Because some nights when the wind dies and the world goes quiet, I can feel it breathing with me. And deep down, I know the truth. The legends aren't warnings, they're invitations. I didn't notice the creek bed at first. It was just another scar in the forest floor, choked with dead leaves and pale stones like bones left in the sun. We'd been walking for hours, trying to cut across a shortcut that didn't exist, the map folded uselessly in my back pocket. It was supposed to be a gentle loop around the northern ridge, my idea, not Emma's. The silence out here was oppressive. No wind, no birds. Just our boots scuffing against pine needles and the faint squeak of my pack straps. Emma had stopped talking an hour ago, her voice swallowed by the woods like everything else. We came to the creek by accident. I stepped down into it, half expecting mud, but my boots hit dry stone. The bed was bone white and sunken, flanked by high banks as if water had carved through here for centuries before abandoning it. "Wasn't this marked?" Emma asked. Her voice sounded smaller than usual, like she was forcing it through clenched teeth. I shook my head. Not on the map. That wasn't entirely true. I remembered seeing a thin blue line here earlier, just faint enough to doubt myself. Now I wondered if I'd folded the map wrong. Emma crouched, picking up a stone, rolling it in her hand. It was smooth, almost polished, streaked faintly red like rust. I told myself it was iron from the soil. We followed the dry bed without really discussing it. It felt safer than pushing through unmarked forest. Safer, at least, until the smell hit me. It was faint, metallic, like wet pennies left in the sun. I kept glancing over my shoulder, convinced it came from behind us, but Emma didn't seem to notice. She was ahead of me, balancing on stones, arms out for balance. Then she slipped. Her yelp snapped through the trees. I saw her catch herself on a low branch, but when she stood again, she was cradling her hand, blood welled between her fingers. "Damn it," she hissed. I reached for her. "Let me see." It wasn't bad, a shallow cut, bark-splintered skin, but her blood dripped onto the pale stones, bright and obscene against the white. I was about to dig out the first aid kit when I heard it. Water. A trickle at first, then louder, until the dry creek wasn't dry anymore. Thin rivulets of dark water bled from cracks in the stones, converging where Emma's blood had fallen. It wasn't red exactly, not at first, more like a deep amber, staining as it spread. Emma's eyes went wide. "Is this?" "I don't know." My voice cracked. The sound of running water filled the air, louder than it should have been, drowning out the silence. The smell of metal thickened, clinging to my teeth. I watched the creek surge until it ran ankle-deep, dark and slow. We should have run. I know that now. Instead, we stared like idiots. Emma crouched again, dipping her fingers in. The water looked redder now, red in a way that made my stomach tighten. She raised her fingers to her mouth before I could stop her. "Emma, I'm thirsty," she murmured. Her voice was strange, slow, as if it belonged to someone else. I grabbed her wrist, but it was too late. She licked her fingers clean, eyes closing like she was savoring it. And then she gasped, not in pain, in relief. I swear her shoulders loosened, while her face brightened as if she'd just been standing in the sun after days of cold. "You need to try this," she whispered. Every instinct screamed no, but I didn't move. I just watched her cup her hands in the crimson water and drink. Her pupils dilated, swallowing her irises. Her lips trembled. "It feels good." I told myself to grab her, drag her away, do anything. But instead, I stared at my own reflection in that dark water. It rippled even though there was no wind, my face warping in slow pulses. And then I heard it. A voice in the water, not loud, just a murmur beneath the trickling sound, words stretched and broken like static. It said my name. I don't remember kneeling, only that I tasted the water before I realized I'd moved. It was warm, almost thick, like I'd bitten my tongue and swallowed blood. And then everything shifted. The forest around us bent. Not literally, but my depth perception collapsed in on itself. The trees seemed closer, their trunks leaning in like spectators. The smell of iron burned my nose. Emma laughed, a high, ringing laugh that didn't sound like her. She looked at me, eyes glassy. "Do you hear it?" I nodded because I did. A voice behind the voice. Low, deep, patient. It said, "The desert echoes, but not always in the direction you expect." The phrase made no sense, but I recognized it. I'd seen it once before in a forum thread about strange maps, a post that vanished the next day, replaced with a 404 error and a blank white screen. I didn't tell Emma that. We walked downstream, the water running thick beside us. It led us deeper into the woods, though woods didn't feel right anymore. The air buzzed faintly like static before a storm. I thought I saw something move in the corner of my eye, a pale shape low to the ground, keeping pace with us. When I looked directly at it, there was nothing. The creek narrowed suddenly, ending at a stone outcropping where the water poured into a fissure and vanished underground. Emma didn't hesitate. She dropped to her knees, pressing her ear against the stone, as if listening. I reached for her shoulder. "What are you?" "Shh," she hissed. Her breathing slowed, shallow and rhythmic. I crouched beside her, my skin crawling. That metallic scent was suffocating now. And then I heard it too. From deep within the rock, faint voices, distant, overlapping like 1,000 whispers layered together. Too far to make out words, but close enough that my teeth hurt. Emma's hand found mine, ice cold. "They're saying my name," she breathed. My stomach dropped, because they were saying mine too. I yanked my hand away from hers and stumbled backward, my boots scraping against the stones. "Emma, get up," I said, my voice louder than I intended. She didn't move. Her ear stayed pressed to the rock, her fingers digging into the moss like claws. "They know us," she whispered. Her voice was calm, too calm, like someone speaking in their sleep. I scanned the tree line. The forest felt wrong, compressed, as though everything beyond a few feet blurred at the edges. My breath came fast, sharp in the quiet. The creek behind us no longer sounded like water. It was thicker now, each splash more like a wet slap, like something alive writhing through it. "Emma." I grabbed her shoulder and shook hard. Her head snapped toward me. Her pupils were huge, black swallowing brown. For a split second, her expression didn't look like hers. It was vacant, almost curious, like a stranger studying me through her skin. I jerked back instinctively. "We're leaving." That snapped her out of it, or maybe just startled her enough to blink. She stood shakily, wiping her cut hand across her jeans. Her blood was smeared now, mixing with dirt, but it no longer seemed to matter. We retraced our steps upstream. Or we tried to. The creek bed forked. I swear it hadn't before. Emma glanced between them. "Which way did we?" "Left," I said automatically, though I wasn't sure. But something felt off. The rocks were different, sharper and slicker. The banks rose higher on each side until we were walking in a trench deep enough that the canopy vanished overhead. And then it was there again. The smell, metallic, thicker. My tongue tingled like I'd licked a battery. Emma squeezed my hand, her nails biting skin. "Do you hear that?" At first, I thought she meant the static. It buzzed faintly in the air now, a distant hum under my skull. But then I realized she meant something else. Footsteps, soft, deliberate, behind us. I spun, flashlight cutting through shadows. Nothing. The trench was empty, pale stones glinting wetly in the beam. Then, faintly, a shape moved between trees high above the bank. Just a flicker, white against dark bark. Too tall to be human. I didn't tell her. We climbed out of the trench, breath ragged, but the forest wasn't the same. The trees were closer together here, their trunks pale and straight like pillars in a cathedral. Everything smelled wet, but there hadn't been rain in weeks. Moss clung thick to the bark, veined red like raw meat. And then we saw it. A signpost nailed to one of the trees. Weathered wood, words carved deep enough to last decades. Red Hollow, 0.6 mimers. I froze. That name, I'd seen it before, on a scanned PDF buried deep in a subreddit about vanished trails. The file was tagged USFS internal and had been taken down within hours, flagged with a sensitive material, notice that disappeared after a day. The only thing I remembered from it was a grainy photograph of this exact sign, slanted in almost the same angle. Emma brushed past me. "This way," she said, already moving toward it. Her voice was steady now, too steady. The trail narrowed, twisting between the trees until the forest broke suddenly into a clearing. In the center was a small, circular pool of water. Perfectly still, no inlet, no outlet, just a black mirror sunk into the earth. Around it, the creek bed we'd followed simply stopped, as if cut off midstream. I stepped closer, peering in. My reflection rippled, slowly, unnaturally, even though the surface didn't move. Behind me, in that warped mirror, I saw shapes among the trees. I turned. Nothing. Emma knelt at the edge, dipping her hand in. "Stop," I hissed. She smiled faintly. "It's warm." I grabbed her wrist, but her skin was freezing. The static rose, louder now, this a low roar that vibrated in my chest, and then beneath it, a whisper. "Stay." I jerked back, heart hammering. Emma didn't even flinch. She just stared at the water, lips moving silently. I saw something glint near the pool, a shape half buried in mud. I crouched, wiping it clean. It was a coin. Old, tarnished, etched with a symbol I recognized but couldn't place. 3 concentric circles like ripples frozen mid-wave. I'd seen it before, once faintly carved into a trailhead post in Zion, and another time scratched into a park bench in Tillamook Forest. I'd dismissed it as graffiti. Emma's voice broke my focus. "They said it's not far now," she murmured. I stared at her. "Who?" Her gaze didn't leave the water. "The ones below." The pool rippled. No wind, no sound but the static. And then it drained, like someone pulled a plug. The water spiraled downward, vanishing into a dark hole in the center, wide enough for a person. Emma stood and stepped toward it. I grabbed her arm, panicked. "What the hell are you doing?" Her eyes locked on mine, wide and glassy. "They've been waiting." I tightened my grip on her arm, but she twisted free with surprising force, her boots scraping against the wet stones. "Emma, stop!" "Stop!" My voice cracked, swallowed instantly by the trees. She didn't answer. She crouched at the lip of the hole, peering into it like she was listening to something below. The static was deafening now, a deep vibration that rattled my teeth. I stepped closer and felt it. The air rising from the hole was warm, damp, and smelled unmistakably of iron. Emma swung one leg over the edge. I lunged, grabbing her pack straps, hauling her back. She fought me, thrashing hard enough that her nails raked my arm. "Let go," she screamed, but her voice didn't sound right. It wavered, layered, like there were 2 of her shouting at once, one desperate, one calm. I dragged her back from the hole, both of us crashing into the moss. She went limp suddenly, gasping, blinking up at me like she didn't recognize where she was. What's happening?" She stammered. Her pupils were still huge. I didn't answer. I yanked her to her feet, half carrying her away from the pool. That's when I heard it, from inside the hole, footsteps. Slow, deliberate, climbing. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I gripped Emma's hand tight and ran, crashing through undergrowth, the forest clawing at us. The air felt thicker the farther we went, heavy with that smell like breathing in rust. The creek bed twisted underfoot, stones slick, pulling us off balance. I barely noticed when Emma stumbled. I dragged her upright, forcing us onward. We ran until my lungs burned, until the static dulled to a distant hum. We burst back into trees that felt wrong in a different way, taller, spaced wider apart. The canopy opened just enough to see a faint gray sky above. I stopped, panting. Emma collapsed against a tree, shaking, eyes glassy. "We're out," I said, though I didn't believe it. She nodded faintly, lips trembling, and then I saw it, the signpost, the same one. Red Hollow, 0.6 miles. Only this time, the wood was newer, the carving sharp, fresh. Emma whimpered. "No, we just—" I grabbed the map from my pack, unfolding it with trembling hands. The forest here was blank, no creek, no clearing, no red hollow, just empty green. I stared hard, certain I'd seen a faint blue line earlier, but now it was gone. We camped there that night because we were too exhausted to move. I set up the tent in silence, every sound amplified, the snap of branches, the whisper of nylon, Emma's shallow breathing. I didn't sleep. At some point, the wind picked up, low and mournful, threading through the trees. It carried faint words, broken, stretched syllables I couldn't piece together. Emma stirred beside me, eyes fluttering open. "They're still calling," she whispered. I shushed her, pressing my hand over her mouth, listening, and then I heard it too. Our names, woven in the wind. Near dawn, I caught movement outside the tent. I froze, heart slamming. A silhouette stood just beyond the nylon wall. Tall, still, watching. I didn't move, didn't breathe, and then it spoke, low and deliberate, each word vibrating through my chest. "The creek only runs when you bleed." The shadow shifted, bent, and vanished. When morning came, Emma was gone. Her sleeping bag lay empty, zipper undone. I stumbled outside, searching, shouting her name until my throat went raw. The forest swallowed every sound. And then I saw them. Footprints. Bare, leading toward the trees. I followed, desperate. The tracks led to a dry creek bed. And there on one pale stone a single coin rested. Tarnished, etched with the 3 concentric circles. I picked it up. It was warm. I don't remember leaving the forest. Not really. I came to hours later, stumbling onto an empty trailhead parking lot. My van sat there, keys still in the ignition. Emma was gone. I drove for hours without stopping, shaking, gripping the wheel until my hands went numb. When I checked my phone later, I found something strange. A video had appeared in my saved files, one I didn't remember recording. It was short, 15 seconds of me standing at the edge of that black pool, staring down. Behind me, shapes moved in the trees, and faintly from somewhere below, Emma's voice whispered, "The desert echoes, but not always in the direction you expect." I deleted it, but every time I close my eyes, I still hear it. And sometimes faintly when I wash my hands, I swear the water in the sink runs red. I still remember the first time I heard about someone vanishing on the road. It wasn't a campfire tale. It wasn't whispered by paranoid travelers. It was told to me by a ranger at a dusty campground in northern Arizona, his voice low and serious in the quiet of early evening. He leaned against the side of my RV, eyes shifting toward the tree line, and said, "Sometimes people don't come back. Not because they get lost, because they're taken by this place." He didn't elaborate, and maybe that was worse than if he had. Those words planted a seed in me, one that took root deep and silent, growing each mile I traveled. As I crisscrossed the country in my RV, driving from remote desert camps to damp forest parks, I realized how thin the line truly is between freedom and vulnerability out here. Every trip sharpened my awareness. Every lonely campsite reminded me that I was a single vehicle parked in a sea of darkness. Out here, you don't vanish loudly. You just stop being found. That fear didn't truly sink in until the night I camped at an unmarked pull-off along Highway 50 in Nevada, known as the loneliest road in America. I'd been driving for hours, my headlights carving tunnels of light through endless stretches of sagebrush and sand. The sky above was so wide it felt oppressive, the stars sharp enough to cut. I parked in the gravel shoulder beside a flat plain that looked like it hadn't seen human footprints in years. There were no other RVs, no signs of life, just me, my rig, and the kind of silence that presses against your chest. That night, I dreamed about knocking, slow, deliberate like knuckles against my RV door. When I jolted awake, the knocking was still there. 3 soft taps, a pause, then 2 more. I froze, listening, my breath locked in my throat. By the time I found the courage to pull back the curtain, there was no one there. No footprints, no wind, just the desert holding its breath. The next morning, I found a single set of tire tracks veering off the main road into the scrubland, vanishing into nothing. When I mentioned it at a gas station 40 miles away, the cashier gave me a look I still can't shake. "Happens out here," she said, like she was talking about the weather. "Folks just disappear. Some don't even leave their rigs behind." She told me about a couple last seen in a rest area along this very highway. Their RV was later found unlocked, keys still in the ignition, but no trace of them. Their food was untouched. Their dog was gone too. No signs of struggle, no blood, no notes, just absence. I remember driving out of that gas station with my hands tight on the wheel, watching the rearview mirror like I expected to see someone or something following me. The deeper I got into the lifestyle, the more stories I heard. A man in Montana whose RV was discovered parked neatly at a remote trailhead, camp chairs folded, firewood stacked, but his bedding inside was undisturbed, like he never slept in it. Witnesses claimed they saw him the night before, grilling dinner, music playing low. In the morning, he was gone. Search and rescue teams combed the forest, helicopters circled overhead, dogs sniffed every inch of the ground, but nothing. It was as though he'd stepped outside and simply ceased to exist. His brother later said something that stuck with me. He wasn't the type to run. He loved that RV more than his house. That detail haunted me, the idea that your RV, the one place you think is safe, could become a tomb of unanswered questions. There was one story that hit me harder than the rest, though, because it happened to someone I knew in passing. Emma and I had met at a campground near Zion National Park, both of us solo RVers, swapping stories under the glow of lantern light. She was 32, fiercely independent, the kind of person who laughed too loud and drove an old Winnebago that looked like it had seen half the country. A few weeks later, I heard she vanished from a Forest Service road in Utah. The last person to see her was another camper who noticed her RV parked alone in a clearing off the main trail. He swore he saw her walking toward the tree line at dusk, barefoot, her arms hanging loose like she was sleepwalking. When he approached to call out to her, she didn't answer. She just stepped deeper between the trees. By morning, her RV was still there, keys on the table, coffee cup half full. Emma was never found. I started paying attention to the places these disappearances happened. They weren't the busy campgrounds with families roasting marshmallows and kids riding bikes in loops. No, they were always the edges, the forgotten service roads, the dead-end trails, the spaces where the pavement fades to dirt and the signs stop pointing anywhere. Places you only end up if you're chasing solitude or trying to save a few bucks on camping fees. I realized I'd been parking in those same kinds of places for years, never thinking twice. That realization twisted in my stomach every time I pulled off a highway into some quiet patch of nothingness. Every creak of my RV frame at night felt louder. Every shadow cast by my porch light felt closer. It wasn't just the isolation that scared me, though. It was the way people talked about it. Locals in small towns always had this acceptance about them, like they knew something they weren't saying. Once in New Mexico, I stopped at a diner and asked about a missing RVer whose photo was tacked up by the register. The waitress refilled my coffee, shrugged, and said, "Road takes people sometimes." No explanation, no sympathy, just that. Road takes people. I left a tip and drove on, but those words echoed through me long after. And it was during one of those long, silent drives, hours of empty desert highway stretching in every direction, that I felt it most. The thinness of it all. One blown tire, one bad turn, one stranger knocking on your RV door at 2 a.m., and you're gone. Forgotten not because people stop looking, but because there's nothing left to find. Out here, the wild doesn't care about you. It swallows you whole. And still, I keep driving. I keep camping. Because for every terrifying story, for every shadow that lingers in the tree line, there's something unshakable in this life too. Resilience, awareness, a sharpened instinct that teaches you how to listen to the land, to your gut, to that voice in the back of your mind that says, don't open the door, don't take that trail, don't ignore the sound you just heard outside. This lifestyle is freedom, yes, but it demands respect. The road is vast and untamed, and if you don't stay alert, it will remind you just how small you really are. That's why I'm telling you this, because those vanishings, they're not just headlines or rumors traded over campfires. They're warnings written in tire tracks and empty RVs left to bake in the sun. Out here, you're your own first line of defense, and the difference between coming home and becoming a story someone else tells is knowing how thin the silence can get before it swallows you whole. I think about Emma often when I park somewhere new. I catch myself scanning the tree line, double-checking the locks, even listening for sounds I used to dismiss. The low hum of wind against the siding, branches brushing the roof, distant footsteps that might just be deer, or might not. The truth is, the wilderness doesn't give you certainty. It gives you possibility. Every rustle in the underbrush feels like a question. Are you safe? Are you sure? I used to crave that quiet. Now it feels alive in a way I can't explain, like it's pressing in, waiting for me to slip. A few months back, I stayed at a primitive campsite deep in the Ozarks, a place so remote my GPS gave up halfway there. The forest was thick, the kind that swallows sound whole, and the nearest town was nearly 30 miles away. That night, I heard something scrape along the side of my RV. Not the random creak of settling metal or an animal brushing past. This was slow, deliberate, like fingertips dragging across paint. I sat frozen in the dark, holding my breath, every instinct screaming not to move. It lasted maybe 10 seconds, but it felt like hours. When I finally dared to look outside, flashlight trembling in my hand, nothing was there. No prints in the dirt, no broken branches. Just the same thick silence pressing down on me. The next morning, I found something on the window above my bed. Smudges. Greasy, human-shaped smudges. 4 long streaks, as if someone or something had rested their hand there, watching. I left that campsite before sunrise, heart pounding so hard I barely remembered to retract my awning. It was the drive out, twisting down those narrow dirt roads, where I realized just how many places out here don't even have names on a map. If something happened to me in that spot, if I simply vanished like Emma or those couples I'd heard about, who would even know where to start looking? And yet, the more I travel, the more I see that this is part of the bargain. This life, the freedom, the endless horizon, the campfires under alien skies, comes with risk baked into its bones. Most people don't talk about it because it feels unlucky to say out loud. They'll share tips about black tanks and solar panels all day long, but when it comes to the darker side of RV living, you get whispers instead of warnings. Stories told in half light, always prefaced with, I don't know if it's true, but. I remember meeting an older man in Oregon, retired Navy, traveling in a battered Class A with his dog. We got to talking one evening, and he told me he used to keep a journal of every strange disappearance he heard about on the road. He said he stopped because it got too heavy, because patterns started to form he didn't want to see. Too many of them happened near water, he told me, his weathered hands gesturing vaguely toward the dark tree line where a creek murmured unseen. Rivers, lakes, reservoirs. You'd think they drowned, but most of the time nothing's found. Like they just stepped in and never came out. That night I couldn't sleep. The air in that Oregon campground felt damp and cold, the kind of chill that seeps into your bones. I kept picturing headlights catching on an empty shoreline, an RV parked neat and proper with the door ajar, ripples on the water where no one's swimming. By 4 a.m., I was back on the road, headlights carving through mist, that old man's words looping in my head. They just stepped in and never came out. Over time, I've learned that the real danger isn't just the wilderness. It's complacency. It's trusting that silence means safety. It's thinking you'll always have enough time to react. I started changing how I camp. I stay closer to main roads. I keep my phone charged, my location shared with someone I trust. I stopped ignoring my instincts because out here, hesitation is a luxury you can't afford. One wrong decision, one ignored gut feeling, and you could become the next name on a bulletin board at some roadside diner. Still, there's something else I can't shake. The sense that some of these vanishings don't feel natural. I've parked at campgrounds where the air feels wrong the second you step outside, like you're being sized up. Places where your own voice sounds strange when you speak aloud, swallowed by trees that don't echo back. And then there are the moments, fleeting, impossible, that gnaw at my memory. A figure standing at the edge of my campfire light one night in Utah, too far to see clearly, but close enough to feel their presence. Footsteps pacing around my RV in Wyoming, circling once, then vanishing into dead quiet. In those moments, logic doesn't help you. You tell yourself it's nothing, but deep down, some primal part of you knows better. That's why I keep talking about this, not to scare anyone out of RVing, but because these roads demand more than wanderlust. They demand awareness. They demand you respect that this freedom comes with shadows. I've seen too many tire tracks veer off into nowhere, too many missing posters sun-faded and curling at the corners to pretend otherwise. And every time I pull into a new site, every time I shut off my engine and step into that vast quiet, I hear the ranger's voice from all those years ago. Sometimes people don't come back, not because they get lost, because they're taken by this place. And if you've ever spent a night out there alone, deep in the dark where no signal reaches and no headlights pass, you know exactly what he meant. There was a night in northern Idaho when I truly understood how close the edge can be. I had parked my RV at a dispersed campsite near Priest Lake, miles from anything resembling civilization. It was the kind of place that seemed perfect in daylight, towering pines framing a still, black lake. No noise but the occasional cry of a loon across the water. But when night came, it was like the forest shifted. The trees became walls, the silence became oppressive, and I felt watched. Not in the vague, paranoid sense you get in the woods sometimes, but in a bone-deep certainty that if I opened my door, I wouldn't be alone out there. Around midnight, I heard it, a splash in the lake. Not the playful, random kind from fish. This was heavy, deliberate. I froze in my bunk, listening, heart thudding in my ears. Another splash. Then silence. I told myself it was nothing, forced my breathing to slow, tried to let it go. But just when I was about to drift off, there came a third sound, footsteps, slow, wet steps squelching in the dirt just outside my window. They paced once, twice, then stopped. My entire body went rigid. Whoever or whatever it was stood there for a full minute, not moving, not speaking. And then, nothing. No retreating steps, no rustle in the underbrush, just gone. At dawn, I checked outside. No footprints. The ground was soft enough to hold impressions, but there was nothing. Not even a hint someone had walked there. I remember staring at that empty dirt, feeling a kind of dread that didn't make sense. It wasn't just fear, it was a realization. Some things don't leave traces because they aren't supposed to. That thought followed me into Montana, where I camped at a small Bureau of Land Management site along the Missouri River. The camp host there, a wiry man named Sam, maybe in his 60s, warned me before I turned in for the night. He pointed upriver and said, "Don't go walking past dark. Folks get turned around up there and don't come back." I asked if he meant they got lost. He shook his head slowly. Not lost, just gone. His voice was matter-of-fact, like he was telling me the weather report. Sure enough, that evening I heard shouting echoing downriver. It was faint, distant, but unmistakable. A man's voice calling for help. I grabbed my flashlight, stepped toward the bank, and then I stopped. Because something about it wasn't right. The cadence was off, like a recording skipping on repeat. Help. Pause. Help. Pause. Over and over, the same tone, the same pitch. My skin crawled. I backed away from the water and locked my door, Later, when I asked Sam about it, he only nodded. "Yep," he said, "you heard it too." He didn't elaborate, and I didn't ask. The thing is, after enough miles and enough lonely nights, you start piecing together a picture that no one really talks about. It's not just that RVers vanish, it's how they vanish. Perfectly ordinary evenings, half-finished meals, engines still warm. It's like they simply stepped out for a moment and never returned. Law enforcement writes it off as wandering too far or getting lost, but those of us who've spent years on the road know better. There's a rhythm to it, a pattern that runs deeper than bad luck. I think about the couple I met in New Mexico, Sarah and Miguel. They were newlyweds in their late 20s, bright-eyed, the kind of people who made you believe in the good of strangers. We crossed paths twice, once near Carlsbad Caverns, once again outside Flagstaff. A few months later, I saw their faces on a missing persons flyer taped to a gas pump in Arizona. Their RV had been found near a canyon overlook, keys in the ignition, doors locked from the inside. The ranger who found it said there were 2 mugs of coffee still sitting on the table, both half drunk. No signs of struggle, no footprints leading away, just locked doors and silence. When you live like this, you learn quickly that isolation isn't just peace and quiet, it's exposure. Out there past the glow of cities, there are no witnesses, no neighbors close enough to hear if you scream. The world feels bigger, but it also feels hungrier. I remember sitting in my rig one night, staring at my own reflection in the dark window and realizing how easy it would be. One knock on the door, one voice calling from outside, one mistake, and you're gone. But here's what they don't tell you. What keeps me going, what keeps a lot of us going, even with the risk carved into every mile, that fear sharpens you. It makes you vigilant. It strips away the false comfort of crowds and noise and puts you face to face with yourself. Out there, in the black silence of an unmarked road, you learn exactly what you're made of. And you learn that survival isn't just about luck. It's about listening to your gut, to the subtle wrongness in the air, to the way your RV creaks differently when someone's standing too close outside. I've come to believe that those of us who keep traveling, who keep parking our rigs on lonely forest roads and desert flats, do so because we understand that danger doesn't cancel freedom, it defines it. Every missing RVer is a reminder etched into the asphalt. Pay attention, stay sharp, and never forget that the road takes as much as it gives. Because out here, you're not just camping, you're testing yourself against a silence older than memory, a darkness that has swallowed better people than you or me. And if you respect it, if you learn from those untold stories, you just might make it back to tell your own. There was a time in eastern Utah when I almost became one of those untold stories. I'd been driving all day, pushing past exhaustion, and decided to pull off at a remote trailhead near Canyonlands National Park. No hookups, no amenities, just a dusty gravel lot surrounded by low, jagged cliffs. I remember the way the air felt still, like the landscape was holding its breath. I set up quickly, ate a cold sandwich, and crawled into bed, thinking I'd get an early start in the morning. Sometime after midnight, I woke to a sound I couldn't place. It wasn't footsteps or an animal. It was softer, like fabric dragging over dirt. At first, I told myself it was wind against the canvas of my awning. But then I remembered. I hadn't put the awning out. The noise circled my RV, slow, steady, deliberate. I stayed perfectly still, staring at the ceiling, every nerve in my body on fire. Then came the knock. One single, hollow knock on the side of the RV. Not the door, the wall. I held my breath so long my lungs burned. Whoever or whatever it was didn't knock again. The dragging sound faded, replaced by silence so absolute I could hear my own heartbeat. When dawn came, I finally forced myself to look outside. Nothing, not even footprints, just empty dirt stretching out in every direction. That morning, I left faster than I'd ever broken camp before. As I drove, I thought about how close I'd been, how easily I could have opened the door to check, how easily curiosity could have overruled caution. That's when I understood why so many disappearances are labeled mystery, because most of them aren't dramatic. They don't involve screams or broken glass. They happen in quiet moments when someone steps outside to see what's there and doesn't come back. Later that year in West Texas, I met a couple named John and Rebecca at a rest stop. They'd been RVing for over a decade, seasoned travelers with more experience than I could imagine. When the conversation turned to safety, John leaned closer and said, "There's something people don't want to talk about. You know why folks disappear? Because the wild makes them doubt their own senses." He told me about a night near Big Bend when he heard a child crying outside his RV. He swore it sounded exactly like his granddaughter. But they were hundreds of miles from home. "I almost opened the door," he said. "My hand was on the handle." He didn't. In the morning, he found small footprints in the dust around his RV. Barefoot, child-sized. They circled his rig twice, then vanished into the desert. That story hit me harder than I expected because it wasn't the wilderness itself. It was something using what we care about, what we trust, to lure us out. I started thinking about those stories of RVers sleepwalking away from their rigs, about Emma walking barefoot toward the trees. What if it isn't always a conscious choice? What if the road doesn't just take people physically, but pulls them out of themselves first? I don't have answers. None of us do. But I've noticed the same signs crop up over and over again in places tied to these vanishings. Deep silence, no cell signal, wildlife that disappears suddenly, like even the animals know something's wrong. And then there's that feeling you can't explain, a weight in the air, like the land itself is paying attention to you. One night in Oregon, camped near Crater Lake, I felt it stronger than ever. I was sitting by my fire, watching the glow paint the trunks of the surrounding pines, when I realized I hadn't heard a single bird or insect in over an hour. The fire popped loudly in the silence, and I felt this sudden certainty that I wasn't alone. Not the casual kind of, oh, someone else is camping nearby, but the ancient instinctive knowledge that eyes were on me. I scanned the tree line with my flashlight and saw nothing, but I felt it anyway. That low hum of dread you can't rationalize away. That night, I didn't sleep. The next morning, I walked to the edge of the lake and found something that still unsettles me. In the soft mud along the shore, there were tracks, boot prints. Only they didn't lead to the water. They came out of it, perfectly formed prints, toes pointed inland, stopping just 20 feet from where I stood, and then nothing. No return trail, no dispersal, just an ending. When I tell these stories, some people laugh it off. They say it's imagination, paranoia, too many nights alone in the woods. But if you've been out here long enough, if you've parked your RV under skies so dark you can see the Milky Way bend above you, you know better. You know how fast beauty turns to menace when the sun sets. You know how thin that door feels when something brushes past it at 2 a.m. You know how easy it is to vanish. That's why I tell everyone this. Take the fear seriously, not to let it rule you, but to let it sharpen you. Keep your doors locked, your instincts loud, and your location known. Because the truth is, the road is a paradox. It's freedom wrapped in risk. Every mile is a gamble you take with the unknown. And for those who didn't come back, who left their coffee cups half full and their headlights still warm, that gamble was their last. And yet, here's the part no one expects. Despite it all, despite every warning and every story, I still choose it. Because out here, you see the world raw and unfiltered. You feel alive in a way you can't inside walls. The fear isn't a barrier, it's a reminder that you're small, that you're mortal, that the wilderness isn't yours to tame. It demands respect. And when you give it, when you stay aware, it grants you nights so quiet you can hear your own heart, mornings so beautiful you forget the dark entirely. But you never forget the stories. You never forget the names. And maybe that's the point. To remember them. To keep their ghosts riding shotgun with you, whispering caution as you roll down another endless highway into another empty place where anything could be waiting. Because the truth is, the wild isn't cruel. It's indifferent. And if you don't listen to that silence, if you don't feel it pressing in, you risk becoming one more unsolved note in its long, quiet ledger. And out here, that ledger runs deep. It was in Colorado where I finally understood how easily that ledger could claim me. I had parked in a national forest pull-off outside of Gunnison, a spot another RVer had recommended as secluded but safe. I arrived late in the afternoon, the sun sinking low enough to turn the mountains blood red. The air smelled of pine and cold earth, the kind of sharp, clean scent that clears your head. It felt peaceful. Too peaceful. I told myself I was just tired from the drive, but even as I leveled the RV, I couldn't shake the tension in my shoulders. By nightfall, fog began to creep in from the valley below. It was thick and low, swallowing the trees until they looked like broken stakes in a white sea. I was inside, reading by the soft hum of my overhead light, when I heard what I thought was a voice outside. A single word, low, drawn out, too muffled to understand. My stomach knotted instantly. I killed the light and sat in darkness, listening. The fog outside reflected my porch light back at me like a wall, and I realized with an icy clarity that I couldn't see more than 5 feet beyond my window. The voice came again. Closer. Still indistinct, like someone talking through a layer of water. I didn't move. I barely even breathed. And then came the knock. Light. Polite. Just 3 taps on my door. Whoever it was didn't say a word afterward. They didn't try again. They just waited. I could feel it, the presence on the other side of that thin metal door. I sat frozen for what must have been 20 minutes, the fog pressing so close it seemed to seep through the seams of the RV. Finally, the sound of footsteps retreated, slow and deliberate, fading into the silence. I stayed awake until dawn, my hand clenched around the handle of my heaviest flashlight like it was a weapon. When the sun rose, the fog lifted. And there were no footprints, not a single one in the soft earth around my rig. I told a local ranger about it later that day, just casually enough to gauge his reaction. He didn't look surprised. He just said, "You were lucky." When I asked what he meant, he shrugged and added, "Some folks hear voices out there. Some don't come back." His face was calm, steady, like he was stating a fact rather than warning me. That nonchalance haunted me more than any ghost story ever could. And that's when it hit me. People vanish out here because the wild isn't empty. It's vast. Vast enough that a person can step 6 feet off a trail and never be found. Vast enough that even when we search, we're really just skimming the surface. And sometimes, maybe, it's vast enough that things we don't understand move through it unseen. When I drove south through New Mexico a few weeks later, I passed a rest stop bulletin board plastered with missing person flyers. 5 faces stared back at me. Young, old, solo travelers, even a couple. The dates stretched back 10 years, but none of them had been taken down. Someone still cared enough to keep them there, as if hope could outlast the desert sun. I stood there staring, thinking about all the empty RVs left behind, engines cooling in silence. There's a truth no one wants to say aloud. RVers vanish because it's easy to. Because our world is bigger than we remember until we're in the middle of it, surrounded by nothing but dirt roads and tree lines. You think you're safe because you locked your door, because you parked where the map said you could. But safety out here isn't guaranteed. It's borrowed. And every night you park in the middle of nowhere, you're rolling the dice again. And yet, for all that fear, I keep coming back. We all do. There's something about this life that digs into you, something you can't shake once you've felt it. The horizon becomes addictive. The stillness feels like truth. You learn to live with the fear, to respect it, to let it sharpen rather than break you. Because the truth is, the road changes you. You start to see the world differently, not just as a place to pass through, but as something ancient and indifferent that demands your attention, your humility. I think about the ones who disappeared often. I wonder what they saw in their last moments, what choices they made or didn't make. I wonder if they felt that same hum in the air I sometimes do, that sense that the land itself is aware of you. And I wonder if they understood too late that out here, you're not just camping in a park. You're sleeping in a place older than memory, a place that doesn't care whether you leave or stay forever. And maybe that's the lesson. Not to scare you out of this life, but to remind you, pay attention, trust your instincts. Don't ignore the uneasy quiet, the missing bird song, the sudden chill that creeps up your spine. Because those who vanish, they weren't reckless, they weren't foolish, they were just like us. And they forgot for a moment how thin the line is between freedom and oblivion. I haven't forgotten, not since that night in Colorado, not since Emma, or the smudged handprints, or the voice in the fog. Out here, I carry their memory like a lantern. Because the truth is, the wild doesn't want you or hate you. It simply doesn't care if you come back. And if you don't respect that, if you don't stay sharp, you might not. And so every time I kill my engine under a sky bursting with stars, every time I step out into that vast silence and feel it wrap around me like a living thing, I remember those names, those faces on faded flyers. And I whisper to myself, stay alert, stay alive. Don't become another story someone else tells. Because out here, the road remembers, and it's always waiting. There was a night in Wyoming when I felt that truth press against me so hard, I almost turned the key and drove until daylight. I had pulled off onto a gravel spur road near the Bighorn Mountains, the kind of place where the map ends and the land feels untouched. It was stunning in the fading light, layers of pine and shadow rolling endlessly into the distance. By the time I leveled my RV, night was swallowing the sky whole. No moon, no glow from distant towns. Just blackness so deep it felt physical, a weight on my chest. I sat in my RV with the lights dimmed, listening to the tick of the cooling engine. The silence out there was thick, a living thing. It's strange how, when there's no noise at all, your own breathing sounds intrusive. Around midnight, I heard it, a faint metallic sound, sharp and clean, like someone running their hand along the edge of my bumper. I froze. The sound came again, closer this time, right beneath the window where I was sitting. I leaned forward slowly, heart pounding, and killed the lights. For a long time, I sat in the darkness, staring out into nothing. Then I saw it. Movement. Not clear, not defined, just a shift in the blackness, as if a piece of the night peeled away and reformed closer to the RV. I gripped the flashlight on my counter so tight my knuckles ached, but I didn't dare turn it on. Then, without warning, there was a low, steady knock on the rear wall of my RV. Not frantic, not angry, just deliberate. Every instinct screamed at me not to answer. I sat there, rigid, pulse hammering in my ears, while the knock repeated once more. Then nothing. Minutes passed, 10, maybe 20, before I realized my hands were trembling. I barely slept that night, and at first light I forced myself outside. What I found chilled me more than the knocking itself. In the dirt near my back bumper were footprints. Bare. Human. The prints circled the RV twice and then stopped dead. No trail leading away. Just nothing. As if whoever left them had vanished into the air. I drove straight out of there, white-knuckled on the wheel, and didn't stop until I hit a gas station 50 miles away. When I told the attendant what I'd seen, he didn't laugh. He didn't even look surprised. He just said, "Yeah, bighorns will do that." Like it was common knowledge. Like it was just another fact of life out here. It was then I realized something I hadn't wanted to face. Some places don't want you. They don't need to scare you off. They just erase you. Months later, in a small Arizona town near the Superstition Mountains, I struck up a conversation with the sheriff over coffee. I mentioned the flyers I'd seen, the stories I'd heard. He stared into his mug for a long time before answering. "You ever notice how most of them are solo travelers?" he asked. I nodded. "People think it's the woods or the desert that get them," he continued, "but I think it's simpler. No witnesses, no backup, no one to hear if something goes wrong." He told me about an RVer who'd vanished 2 years prior, camped just a few miles from where we sat. Perfect weather, flat ground, no sign of struggle. His RV was found locked, keys on the counter. His boots were neatly placed by the door, socks folded on top. It was as though he had undressed to sleep and simply dissolved out of his bed. That image stuck with me, the neatness of it, because it wasn't frantic, it wasn't chaos, it was quiet, intentional. Like whatever took him didn't have to rush. I started paying attention after that. to the missing, to where they vanished. Most were far from cell towers, far from traffic, far from anything but trees, canyons, rivers. Always the edges, always the silence. And I think that's why these stories cut so deep, because they force you to face the truth about RV life no one talks about. That freedom and isolation are two sides of the same coin. That for every night under a blanket of stars, there's a night when the darkness feels alive. But here's what I've learned after all of it. The knocks, the voices, the handprints, the footprints that go nowhere. Fear is a tool. It's not there to cripple you. It's there to keep you sharp. It reminds you that this life isn't tame, that the world beyond the highway still has teeth. You respect that, or you pay for it. So now every time I park my rig and kill the engine, every time I step out into the quiet and feel it swallow me whole, I remember the ones who didn't come back. And I listen. To the silence, to the faint rustle that might be wind, to the instincts that whisper, not here, not tonight. Because in the end, the road doesn't forgive. It doesn't care. But if you respect it, if you keep your eyes open, your doors locked, and your fear close enough to hear it, you just might stay one step ahead of becoming a name on a flyer someone else finds in a gas station hundreds of miles from here. And when I lie awake in my bunk, staring at the ceiling while the night presses close, I whisper the same thing I always do. Stay sharp. Stay alive. Keep moving. Because out here, the road is watching, and it never stops counting. The first thing you learn about RV parks is that they aren't what the glossy brochures or cheerful Instagram photos make them out to be. I learned this late, after I'd been on the road for years, after I thought I'd seen enough of America's campgrounds to know what to expect. The cracked picnic tables, the faded playground slides leaning like old teeth, the office with a dusty rack of local brochures, and the constant shuffle of travelers passing through. But what I didn't understand, what I couldn't understand, was the way the places where people stay really stay, not just for a weekend or a summer season, but for years, were different. RV parks with permanent residents aren't places you stumble into by accident. You ease into them slowly, without meaning to, like drifting into deep water without realizing how far the shore has gotten. I only ended up in one because I was desperate. This was in southern Arizona, outside a town called Ayo, the kind of sun-baked place where even the street signs look bleached and brittle. My air conditioning had gone out in July, which, if you know the desert, isn't just inconvenient, it's dangerous. I pulled into the first park I could find, a low, flat expanse of dirt lined with old fifth wheels and class mats. As that hadn't moved in a decade or more, their tires melted into the ground, skirts of plywood sealing off the undercarriages. A hand-painted sign nailed crookedly to a post read, Desert Star RV, monthly rates available. The office was a single-wide trailer with peeling white paint. Inside, the air smelled faintly of cigarettes and Lysol. A woman named Margaret, late 50s, leathery skin, sharp blue eyes, slid a clipboard across the counter toward me. "You full-timing?" she asked without looking up. "Just for a bit," I said. "Couple weeks, maybe a month if my AC's not fixed." She gave me this tight smile. It wasn't friendly. "We don't get a lot of short-timers here." That was my first warning sign, but I was too tired, too overheated, and too broke to think much about it. The spot she gave me was wedged between two long-term rigs. On my left was a faded Winnebago with its awning permanently deployed, fabric sagging like old laundry. A man sat beneath it in a recliner, shirtless despite the sunburn peeling across his shoulders, staring at me with bloodshot eyes as I backed in. On my right was a fifth wheel with every window covered in aluminum foil, even the door window, like whoever lived there couldn't bear the idea of being seen or seeing out. That night, as I lay in bed sweating, despite every fan I had running, I started hearing it. A low humming sound from somewhere outside, rhythmic and steady, like someone running an engine just far enough away that I couldn't place it. I got up twice to check, but every time I stepped out into the oppressive desert heat, the sound stopped. The next morning, I saw the man in the recliner again, same spot. Same glassy stare. I waved, but he didn't wave back. Later, when I walked to the office to pick up a package, Margaret leaned over the counter. "You stay to yourself here," she said quietly, like she was giving me advice or a warning. "Don't go knocking on doors. People got their routines." It wasn't until my third day that I noticed how still it was. Not just quiet, still. No kids, no dogs barking, no music playing from open windows like I'd hear at any other park. Just the occasional shuffle of feet on gravel, the metallic slam of an RV door, and that hum, always faint, always there, whenever I tried to rest. One night I couldn't take it anymore. I stepped outside, flashlight in hand, determined to find the source. I followed the sound down the rows of rigs until I came to the far end of the park, where the streetlights had burned out and the ground turned to hard-packed dirt. There I saw it, a cluster of 3 RVs, all identical, all coated in the same tan dust, parked nose to tail like train cars. And from inside those rigs, faintly glowing blue lights seeped through seams in the windows, pulsing in time with the hum. I froze. The air felt heavier there, like the heat pressed differently. I don't know how long I stood staring before I heard footsteps behind me, slow, deliberate crunches of gravel. "Don't," a voice said. I spun around. It was Margaret, holding a flashlight low to the ground. Her face was stone. "You don't walk past this point," she said, her voice calm but sharp enough to cut. "Not at night. Not at all." I started to stammer something, an apology, an explanation, but she shook her head. "Go back to your rig," she said. "Right now." I did. I didn't even ask why. Something in her tone, flat, practiced, made it clear she'd had this conversation before. That night, I slept with every light in my RV on. But the thing is, once you see something like that, those glowing rigs, that blue light, you can't unsee it. You start noticing details you missed before, how no one ever seemed to come or go from certain RVs, how I never actually saw the man in the recliner eat or drink or move except to shift slightly in his chair. How one morning, when I walked past the aluminum-foiled fifth wheel, I swore I heard someone whisper my name from behind the sealed door. I told myself it was just exhaustion, the heat playing tricks on me. But that night, I heard footsteps outside my rig, slow, crunching on gravel, then stopping, right at my door. I didn't move, didn't breathe. I just sat there, staring at the thin metal between me and whatever was outside. And then I heard it. Let us in. A whisper. Not one voice, several, layered, overlapping. I bolted upright and flicked every light I had brighter, but when I yanked open the blinds, there was nothing there, except the hum, louder than ever. And that was the moment I realized something. People didn't just stay here because they couldn't leave. They stayed because they weren't allowed to. And I was starting to understand why. The next morning, I told myself I'd imagined it. I had to. The alternative, that something had stood outside my RV whispering in those stacked voices, wasn't something I could handle. But when I stepped out onto the gravel and saw the faint line of footprints leading away from my door, bare feet, wide-set toes pressed deep into the dust, I stopped lying to myself. I packed my gear that afternoon. I didn't care if my AC was fixed or not. I just wanted out. When I went to the office to settle my account, Margaret was waiting for me. She didn't look surprised. If anything, she looked disappointed. "You leaving?" she asked. "Yeah," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Got the parts I need. Time to move on." She nodded slowly. Then she leaned closer, lowering her voice until it was barely above a whisper. "You got out clean. Don't come back." I froze. Her eyes were steady, clear. "You stayed too long. It changes you," she said. "You've seen them, haven't you? The ones in the back?" I swallowed. She glanced toward the far end of the park, toward those 3 identical rigs with the blue light. "That's where it starts," she said. "New folks who can't afford to leave, or folks who just ain't got anywhere else to go. They sit too long, they listen too close, and before you know it..." She trailed off, pressing her lips thin. "What happens to them?" I asked. She shook her head. "You don't want to know." I should have left right then, but her words dug into me like burrs. That night, instead of pulling out, I stayed one more night, just one, to see for myself. I parked my rig near the exit, engine idling on low, so I could run if I needed to. Then I walked back to the far edge of the park after dark, careful to keep my flashlight off. The hum was louder this time, vibrating in my chest like standing too close to a bass speaker. The blue light leaked stronger through the seams in those RVs, flashing in slow, steady pulses. I crouched behind an old, abandoned Class C and watched. At first, nothing happened, just that steady hum, that pulsing light. But then I saw them. Shadows moving inside the rigs, pacing back and forth, silhouettes of people. But something was wrong. Their shapes bent at odd angles, like their heads were tilted too far back or their arms hung too low. And then one of the doors opened. A figure stepped out into the blue glow. It looked like a man, tall, thin, but its movements were jerky, wrong, like it didn't remember how to walk. Its head turned slowly, unnaturally slowly, until it was facing straight toward me. I froze. Its face caught the light, and I saw the eyes. Black. Not just dark, but empty, like holes punched into paper. Its mouth opened, and from all three rigs, voices rose together in unison. Not words this time, just a sound, long and low, somewhere between a moan and a chant. The hum roared in my skull. My legs locked. I couldn't move. The figure took one step toward me, then another, and then a hand yanked me backward into the dark. "Are you out of your mind?" Margaret hissed. She dragged me behind a stack of rusted propane tanks and shoved me to the ground. "You want to end up like them?" I couldn't answer. Couldn't even breathe. "They ain't people anymore," she said, staring past me at the rigs. "They ain't been for a long time." I finally managed to whisper, "What are they?" She didn't look at me. Her face was pale in the moonlight. "We call them the listeners. They stay too long, they hear too much, and then that hum don't ever leave their heads." We crouched there until the chanting stopped and the figure went back inside, moving like a puppet being wound down. When it was over, Margaret grabbed my arm. "You leave now," she said, low and urgent. "Tonight. If you don't, they'll come for you. They always do." I didn't argue. I sprinted back to my RV, engine still running, and tore out of Desert Star without looking back. In the rearview mirror, the park was just a smear of lights in the distance, swallowed by the desert. I didn't stop driving until I hit Tucson, hours later, and even then, I didn't sleep. I just sat there, staring out my windshield, heart hammering, ears ringing. And in that ringing, I swore I could still hear it. The hum. For days afterward, I couldn't shake it. That hum. It wasn't just in my head, it was in everything. The engine of my RV idling at stoplights, the low rumble of passing semis on the interstate, even the refrigerator running late at night. All of it carried that same vibration, that low, steady thrum that felt like it was working its way back into me. I told myself it was just paranoia, just the lingering aftershock of what I'd seen. But deep down, I knew better. I parked in a KOA outside of Tucson for a few nights. One of those busy family-friendly ones where every other rig has string lights draped along its awning and kids ride bicycles in circles around the gravel loops. I figured if I surrounded myself with noise and life, maybe it would drown out the memory. But even there, I caught myself watching the people who never seemed to leave their rigs, the ones who pulled their curtains shut tight even during the day. Watching the man 3 sites over who sat perfectly still in a lawn chair from sunrise to sunset, sunglasses hiding his eyes, face expressionless as kids screamed and splashed in the pool. I didn't want to admit it, but it was all the same pattern I'd seen before. Permanent residents, long-term stayers, the forgotten ones. A week later, I drove north, New Mexico this time, then Colorado, and everywhere I went, every park I stayed in, I started noticing them. Not many, maybe 1 or 2 at each stop, an RV that hadn't moved in years, a person who didn't talk, didn't smile, just stared. Once in a park outside Durango, I woke at 3 a.m. to the sound of knocking on my door, 3 sharp raps. By the time I grabbed my flashlight and swung the door open, there was no one there. Just footprints in the dust, bare and wide-toed, trailing off toward the far edge of the park. I left before dawn. I started to realize something no one ever talks about in RV forums or campground reviews. These parks are the last stop for a lot of people. Folks who ran out of money, who burned every bridge, who had nowhere else to go. People who park their rig and stay, and stay, and stay. And the longer they stay, the stranger they become. I began avoiding monthly rate parks entirely. I stuck to short-term campgrounds, state parks, anywhere transient enough that nobody stayed put. But even then, that feeling followed me, like I'd brushed up against something I wasn't supposed to see, and it had marked me in return. One night, parked in a rest area in Utah, I woke to that hum again. Clear as day, vibrating through the floor of my rig. I sat bolt upright, heart pounding. It was coming from outside. I grabbed my flashlight and peered out the window, and there it was. An old Class A RV parked one row over, its windows glowing faint blue. I didn't even wait. I threw my rig into gear and floored it, gravel spitting out behind me. I drove until dawn, until the desert light poured across the horizon and the shadows stretched thin and harmless. That was the night I understood something I'd been resisting since I left Desert Star. Whatever those listeners were, they weren't bound to that park. They were bound to me. Or maybe I was bound to them. Since then, I've met other travelers who've hinted at it. In cautious, nervous half-conversations over propane grills or in quiet laundromats. They don't say it outright, but I hear it in their stories. The hum they can't explain, the shadow they saw moving in a locked rig, the neighbor who stared at them for hours and then was gone by morning, leaving nothing but tire tracks that didn't lead anywhere. And always, there's one thing in common. They were all long-term parks, places where time hangs heavy, where the wind scrapes through dry trees and the lights burn all night in the office window, places where if you stay too long, you stop wanting to leave. I think about Margaret sometimes, about how she stayed there anyway, knowing what she knew. Maybe she saw herself as a gatekeeper, someone who could warn off the rest of us before we got too close. Or maybe she was just as trapped as the others, holding her ground at the edge of something she couldn't escape. And me? I keep moving. I never stay in one place more than a few nights now. I keep my blinds cracked just enough to see out, never enough for anyone to see in. But no matter where I go, I hear it. Some nights it's faint, tucked beneath the hum of my generator or the rush of wind through the desert. Other nights it's louder, rising until it's all I can hear, until I'm certain that if I just stopped resisting, if I just listened, I'd finally understand. But I don't. I can't. Because if I do, I know I won't start my engine again. I'll park, I'll shut my blinds, I'll sit, and someday someone passing through will see my rig glowing faint blue at the edge of a dusty RV park, and they'll wonder how long I've been there, and they won't know it's already too late. I used to think RV parks were safe havens, little slices of community scattered across the vast American road, places where retirees swapped stories under awnings, where travelers passed through with cheerful waves, where the only real dangers were flat tires or an overcooked hot dog. But now, every time I pull into a new park, I scan the rows differently. I look for the rigs with sun-faded paint, with makeshift repairs holding them together like stitches. I look for the blinds that never open, for the doorsteps that gather dust because no one steps outside anymore. I listen for that hum, low, steady, hidden in the background of the world, like it's always been there, waiting for people like me to notice it. And I've started to realize something that keeps me awake long after I should be asleep. This lifestyle we romanticize, RV living, life on the road, it's not just sunsets and freedom and campfires. There's a dark side. One we don't talk about because it's uncomfortable, because it's easier to pretend it isn't there. When you live out here long enough, you start to see it. You see the forgotten parks, tucked down dirt roads with signs missing letters. You meet the people who parked their rig just for a month and have been there for 10 years. You see the way time stretches out in those places, heavy and oppressive, until it presses the air flat and makes you forget you were ever going to leave. That's what gets you. Not the fear of something breaking down, not the loneliness, not even the dangers of the road. It's that stillness, that slow erosion of who you are until you're just another shape behind a sealed window. And I get it now. I get how easy it is to slip. You're tired. Funds run low. You tell yourself you'll stay put just long enough to catch your breath. Then a month turns into 6. 6 turns into a year. Before you know it, you don't even think about leaving anymore. You don't remember why you ever wanted to. And maybe that's the scariest part. You don't feel trapped. You feel content. Too content. Like someone turned down the volume of your life until there's nothing left but that hum. I talk about this because people need to know. They need to understand that when you live on the road, when you really live it, not as a vacation, not as a curated social media dream, but day after day, you're flirting with isolation in ways most folks can't imagine. You're vulnerable to the kind of quiet that doesn't just surround you, it changes you. The desert doesn't have to whisper to you. The mountains don't need to roar. Sometimes the danger is in the silence between the two. I've come close, closer than I'll admit to anyone who hasn't felt it themselves. And the truth is, I still don't know if I got out in time. I keep moving, not because I want to, but because I have to. Because if I stop even for a week, even for a few days, I feel it creeping in again. That's what I want every RVer to hear. Keep moving. No matter how tired you are, no matter how tempting it is to stay put just for a bit, don't linger too long in any one place. Not because something is going to crawl out of the woods or knock on your door in the middle of the night, but because something far quieter, far subtler will seep in. And once it's in, I don't think it leaves. Even now, parked in a bustling campground surrounded by life and laughter, I can still feel it sometimes, just beneath everything. That hum. Waiting. And every time I hear it, I remember those 3 rigs at the back of Desert Star RV. The blue light glowing faint through the seams, the shadow that turned and looked right at me with eyes as empty as the night sky. I remember Margaret's voice, steady and tired. You got out clean. Don't come back. And I remember what it felt like standing there, frozen, unable to move. Not from fear, but from something worse. The thought deep in my chest that part of me wanted to walk closer. That's the danger no one talks about. Not just what's out there in the dark, but what's in us, the part that craves stillness, that wants to surrender to it, that wants the hum to take over so we don't have to keep running anymore. So if you ever find yourself in one of those parks, the kind that feels heavy, where time seems thick, where the faces around you look hollow and the rigs don't move, don't wait. Don't explain it away. Leave. Even if you don't understand why. Even if you can't put it into words. Because the longer you sit there, the more it feels normal. And by the time you notice the hum, by the time you see the glow leaking out of a sealed up window at the far end of the lot, it'll already be too late. And you'll tell yourself it's fine. You'll tell yourself you'll leave tomorrow. But you won't. You'll pull your blinds closed. You'll turn off your lights. And someone else will pull into that park desperate and tired and see your rig, and they'll wonder how long you've been there. And they won't know that you're not leaving. Not ever. I still remember the first night we saw the sky tear itself in 2. We were parked just outside Tonopah, Nevada, one of those endless stretches of desert where you feel like the last people on Earth. It was just me, my wife Erin, and our son Caleb, tucked into our 28-foot RV with the desert winds knocking faintly against the aluminum siding. We'd driven all day from Reno, bone-tired but content, surrounded by silence so pure it almost rang in my ears. Out here, the stars were so sharp they looked like needles against black velvet. And for a moment, I felt grateful. Grateful for the kind of darkness that makes you feel small in the best possible way. But then I saw it. The stars, those fixed, eternal points, moved. Or maybe it wasn't movement exactly. It was like they doubled. A faint shimmer, then 2 of each, as if someone had pulled reality like a rubber band and it hadn't quite snapped back. At first, I told myself it was my eyes. Long drives will do that to you. You start seeing phantom lines on the road, headlights that aren't there. But Erin noticed too. She was outside with me, cradling a coffee mug in her hands when she froze mid-sentence and pointed up. Her voice cracked when she said, "Why are there two of Orion?" I laughed, but it was that brittle kind of laugh you make when you can't find any other sound. Caleb was asleep inside, and I didn't want to wake him. So I told her it had to be a temperature inversion, or maybe atmospheric distortion. Words I didn't really believe, but clung to anyway. The desert was cold enough that our breath fogged in front of us, and for a second, that grounded me. But the sky didn't stop splitting. The duplicate stars held their positions, faint but undeniable, like ghosts of the real ones. We didn't talk much as we climbed back into the RV, locking the door out of instinct more than necessity. Out here, in the emptiness, you know the nearest person is probably 20 miles away. But something about those doubled stars felt wrong in a way that had nothing to do with distance or danger. I lay awake long after Erin's breathing evened out beside me, staring at the ceiling and listening to the desert wind howl through the canyon like some far-off animal call. At some point, I must have dozed off, because the next thing I remember is waking to the sound of voices outside the RV. They were faint, distorted, like an old tape recorder played at half speed. But they were our voices. Mine, Erin's, and Caleb's. I froze, every nerve in my body thrumming like it wanted to jump out of my skin. I heard Caleb's laugh, light and high-pitched, exactly the way it sounded when I pushed him on the swings, and then Erin's voice, whispering my name. Only she was asleep right beside me. I held my breath so tight my chest hurt, straining to listen. The wind had died completely, and the silence felt suffocating except for those faint echoes. I nudged Erin awake, my hand trembling. When she heard it too, she went pale. "It's a radio," she whispered, but her voice didn't carry conviction. "Or a CB from some trucker." We didn't own a CB. I eased off the bed and crept toward the door, barefoot, cold linoleum biting my feet. The voices stopped instantly, as if they'd known I was listening. I stood there, frozen, hand hovering over the lock. I don't know how long I waited. Seconds, minutes. But eventually I forced myself to look through the small square window in the door. Nothing. Just sand and sagebrush painted silver by moonlight. My breath fogged the glass. I nearly convinced myself I'd imagined it all until I saw movement. A figure just at the edge of sight, standing perfectly still in the dark. It was me. Or at least it looked like me. Same height, same broad shoulders. Even in the pale light, I could see it wearing my flannel jacket, the one I'd hung by the RV door earlier. I staggered back, heart pounding so loud I was sure it would wake Caleb. Erin saw it too. She covered her mouth with her hand and stared, shaking her head like she could simply deny it away. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, watching. Then, as if triggered by some invisible signal, it slowly turned and walked toward the horizon until it disappeared into the sand. I didn't sleep at all that night. By morning, the desert felt different. Still silent, still vast, but not empty. When I stepped outside, my footprints from the night before had doubled back toward the RV, as though I'd been pacing, circling it, walking right up to the door and then away again. Only I hadn't. I'd been inside. Erin saw them too, and neither of us spoke. We just packed up camp in tight silence and hit the road faster than we'd ever broken down camp before. Caleb, still sleepy, asked why. I told him we were just heading east early to beat the heat. But the truth was simpler. I didn't want to be there one more second. We drove until we reached a small campground outside Ely. No hookups, no amenities, just flat earth and a few scattered mesquite trees. By then, I'd almost convinced myself it had been exhaustion and shadows. Desert nights play tricks on people. There's a reason this landscape drives wanderers mad. But that night, when we parked and unrolled the awning, the stars doubled again. Not gradually this time. Instantly. One moment the sky was whole. The next, it was fractured. 2 moons hung overhead, pale and sharp. Erin grabbed my hand so tightly it hurt, and Caleb looked up from his marshmallow like he'd never seen the sky before. His voice was small. "Dad, why are there 2 of everything?" I didn't have an answer. I told him it was a science thing, something boring he wouldn't understand, but my stomach turned cold when he smiled and said, "Good. I like the other one better." "What other one?" I asked, my throat tight. He pointed behind me. I turned. There we were, another family of three, me, Aaron, and Caleb, standing just beyond the firelight, same clothes, same faces, watching. My first instinct was denial, a trick of the shadows, a reflection, something explainable. But then there Caleb smiled, a mirror of my son's grin, and stepped closer. And every instinct I had screamed, "Do not let them cross that firelight." I grabbed our Caleb and pulled him inside the RV so fast he yelped. Aaron slammed the door shut behind us and locked it, hands shaking. Outside, I could hear them circling, the sound of feet on gravel moving in sync with my own racing heartbeat. And then the knocking started. It wasn't loud at first, just a soft, deliberate tap, tap, tap on the RV's outer walls, as if someone were politely asking to be let in. But it wasn't in one spot. The sound shifted, door, window, rear panel, like they were testing every weak point at once. Erin was whispering, "What do we do?" Over and over, her voice trembling, and I didn't have an answer. Caleb clung to my side, his little fingers digging into my shirt, his wide eyes reflecting the dim glow of the ceiling lights. I killed the lights. The darkness swallowed us whole, save for the faint glow of the stove clock. Outside, the knocking stopped. For a few heartbeats, there was only silence. Then came the voices. It was us. Perfect copies, right down to the intonation. I heard my voice say, "Come out here, Caleb. It's okay." Then Aaron's voice, coaxing and warm, "Sweetheart, open the door. We'll go look at the stars again." Caleb whimpered, burying his face in my chest. Aaron pressed a hand over her mouth, her breathing ragged. And then this is the part that still makes my blood run cold. Caleb answered. Or rather, another version of him did, from outside. It was like hearing your child through a wall, muffled but close. "I'm already out here," it said, cheerful, innocent. "Come on, Dad." My grip on him tightened until he squeaked. "Don't listen," I whispered in his ear. "Stay with me. Stay inside." He nodded, trembling so hard I could feel it in my own bones. The footsteps circled again, slower now, dragging against the gravel like they wanted us to hear every step. I peered out through the thin curtains and my heart nearly stopped. There we were, our doubles, pressing their faces against the glass. I saw my own face staring back at me, expressionless. Aaron's face, Caleb's. Their skin was pale, stretched too tight over their bones, and their eyes... God, their eyes were wrong. They gleamed faintly in the starlight, reflecting the doubled sky like empty mirrors. Then, in unison, they smiled. The sound of it, the silence of it, hit me like a physical blow. No laughter, no breath, just teeth bared in perfect imitation. I stumbled back, clutching Caleb, my mind spinning. Erin grabbed my arm. "We have to leave," she hissed. I didn't argue. I grabbed the keys and bolted for the driver's seat. The moment the engine roared to life, something slammed against the side of the RV, so hard the whole vehicle rocked. Caleb screamed. I didn't look back. I floored it, tires spitting gravel and sand, the headlights cutting through that empty desert night. In the mirrors, I saw them, running, keeping pace. Our doubles sprinted alongside the RV with inhuman speed, their bodies jerking unnaturally, like frames of film missing between movements. They didn't tire. They didn't slow. I pushed the RV harder than I ever should have, 80, 90 miles an hour on a dirt track, but they stayed just beyond the light, flickering in and out like bad reception. Then, all at once, they vanished. I didn't slow down, not for miles. When I finally dared, my hands were shaking so violently I could barely keep hold of the wheel. Erin was sobbing quietly, one hand clutching Caleb to her chest, murmuring nonsense words to soothe him. I kept glancing at the mirrors, terrified they'd reappear. But the desert stretched behind us, empty and silent. We pulled into a rest stop near Ely at dawn, the kind with a single gas pump and a lonely diner that looked like it hadn't changed since 1972. The world felt washed out in that pale light, the stars gone, the doubled sky sealed away like a bad dream. But it hadn't been a dream. I could still feel the vibrations of those impacts against the RV walls. Inside the diner, The smell of coffee and grease should have been comforting, but my nerves were shredded. I kept staring at the dusty windows, half expecting to see our faces staring back in. The waitress, a woman in her 60s with tired eyes, poured us coffee and asked where we were coming from. I told her, voice shaking, that we'd camped near Tonopah. She froze, the pot hovering mid-pour. "You didn't see it, did you?" she asked softly. Erin and I exchanged a glance. "See what?" I said. Her eyes darted toward the window, then back to me. She leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper. "The split. Some nights, the sky pulls apart out there. My husband used to run cattle near Tonopah. He saw it once, years ago. Said he heard himself calling from outside his cabin door. Swore it wasn't a skin prickled. What happened to him?" She hesitated, her mouth pressing into a thin line. "He left," she said finally. "We moved east. Never went back." I wanted to ask more, but Caleb tugged on my sleeve then, his little voice piping up. "Dad," he said, "I saw the other me." My heart stopped. I crouched down, gripping his shoulders. "When?" I asked. "Last night," he said simply, like it was obvious. He smiled at me. He told me he was going to take me home. Erin went white. I felt sick. We left the diner without finishing our coffee. That day, I drove without stopping. I didn't care about exhaustion or fuel or the ache in my hands from gripping the wheel too tight. I just wanted distance between us and Tonopah, Ely, every godforsaken mile of Nevada desert. But as the sun set and the stars returned, my stomach knotted with dread. What if it followed us? What if home wasn't a place at all, but wherever they decided to find us next? That night, we pulled into an RV park outside of Salt Lake City. Packed spaces, floodlights, the hum of nearby traffic, normalcy, safety, or so I told myself. We locked every door and window, drew the blinds, and huddled together in the dark. For hours, nothing happened. Then, just past midnight, Caleb stirred. He sat up in bed and stared at the door, eyes glassy. "They're here," he whispered. And then the knocking began again. It was sharper this time, harder, impatient. A single knock, then another, then rapid pounding that rattled the frame of the door. Erin clutched Caleb, pulling him close, her knuckles white against his pajamas. I crept toward the entry, heart hammering so violently I felt dizzy. The pounding stopped abruptly, replaced by silence so heavy it pressed against my ears. I stood there, holding my breath, staring at the door. Then came my voice. Clear, calm, and horribly familiar, speaking from the other side. "Open the door," it said. I froze. Erin's grip tightened on Caleb. It wasn't just my voice. A second later, I heard Erin's, warm, coaxing, eerily perfect. "It's okay, sweetheart. We're here now. You're safe with us." And then Caleb's voice, small and sweet, echoed from outside. "Dad, it's cold out here." Caleb buried his face in Erin's chest and whimpered. "That's not me," he whispered. His tiny voice cracked. The doorknob rattled. I lunged forward, pressing my weight against it, though it was already locked. The metal turned and jerked violently beneath my hand, like something or someone on the other side was testing it, learning it. Then it stopped. I dared to glance through the small window. They stood there in the glow of the RV park floodlights, perfect copies of us. 3 of them, framed in white light. My double, Erin's, and Caleb's, motionless and smiling. Their skin looked thinner in this light, stretched taut across sharp bones, their eyes hollowed pits reflecting the flood lamps like glass. And in unison they raised their hands and knocked once, slowly, perfectly in sync. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, to turn the key, to drive until the wheels fell off, but my legs wouldn't move. I just stood there, staring at my own face, grinning back at me. Then, without a word, they turned and walked away, straight into the darkness beyond the park lights until they disappeared entirely. For a few minutes, none of us spoke. Then Caleb broke the silence. "Dad," he whispered, "what happens if they catch us?" I had no answer. The next morning, I drove without stopping, past state lines, through mountains and valleys, every mile blurring together. I didn't even remember the towns we passed. I just knew I couldn't risk another night. By sundown, exhaustion clawed at me so fiercely my vision swam, but fear was worse than fatigue. I kept going. When I finally pulled over, it was near a forested rest area in Wyoming. There were other RVs here, truckers idling in the distance, even a few tents pitched beneath the pines. Civilization. Safety in numbers. For the first time in days, I allowed myself to believe we might be okay. But that night, just as sleep began to pull me under, I heard Caleb's voice again. Soft, muffled, as though coming through the walls. "Dad," it said, "they're inside." I bolted upright. The RV was dark still, silent. Aaron was out cold beside me, and Caleb lay in his bunk across from us, wide awake and trembling. His eyes weren't on me. They were fixed on the hallway leading to the kitchen. And then I heard it too. Footsteps, slow, deliberate pacing back and forth just beyond the curtain. I grabbed the nearest thing I could, a heavy flashlight, and ripped the curtain aside. Empty. But the sound didn't stop. It was above us now, on the roof. Heavy, dragging steps across the thin aluminum. Aaron woke with a start, and Caleb began to sob quietly, muffling his cries against her. I motioned for silence, holding my breath, my pulse roaring in my ears. The steps stopped, then 3 sharp knocks, directly overhead. I climbed into the driver's seat, turned the ignition, and floored it. Tires screeched against gravel as I tore out of that rest area like horns blaring from startled truckers as I fishtailed onto the highway. Aaron clutched Caleb in the back, both of them wide-eyed and pale, as I pushed the RV faster than it had any right to go. I didn't stop driving until morning, until sunlight washed over us like a blessing I'd forgotten existed. When I finally pulled over, hands trembling so hard I could barely keep the wheel steady, I realized something terrible. I hadn't seen them this time. Not once. But I'd heard them. And worse, when I glanced in the rearview mirror for just an instant, I saw another RV following us, identical to ours. I blinked, and it was gone. That's when I understood. This wasn't tied to Nevada or Tonopah or any cursed stretch of desert. They weren't outside anymore. They were following us. And I don't know how to make them stop. For days, I drove like a man possessed. State after state blurred past, Wyoming, Nebraska, Kansas. Flat lands, rolling hills, endless asphalt stretching out like some purgatorial ribbon that wouldn't let us rest. I barely slept. Erin dozed in the passenger seat, exhausted, her head against the window, while Caleb lay in the back, silent in a way no 8-year-old should be. I could feel the weight of their fear pressing on me, and it fueled me more than any coffee ever could. But no matter how far we went, no matter how many miles I put between us and Tonopah, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't escaping anything. Because every night, without fail, they came back. The knocks grew bolder, louder. Sometimes they'd come from every surface at once, door, windows, roof, even the floor beneath us, as if we were surrounded on all sides. And the voices. God, the voices. They weren't trying to trick us anymore. They weren't calling gently, coaxing Caleb. Now they screamed. My voice, Aaron's voice, Caleb's voice, all twisted into raw animal sounds that no human throat should make. One night in Missouri, parked at a crowded RV park, I woke to the unmistakable sound of my own laughter outside. Low, hollow. It went on until I felt something in my mind fray, like a rope snapping thread by thread. I yanked open the curtains in a frenzy and saw them standing under a lamppost across the gravel drive. 3 perfect copies, lit like mannequins in a department store window. And behind them, more shadows moved. There were others. Dozens of them, stretching into the dark, faces I didn't recognize, some twisted beyond recognition, all standing silent, watching. That was the first night I truly believed we weren't running from ourselves anymore. We were running from something larger, something that had noticed us the moment we saw the sky split. I started keeping a knife in the driver's seat, a stupid gesture against whatever they were, but I needed the weight of it, the illusion of control. Erin stopped arguing about stopping for rest. She saw it too. The exhaustion etched itself into her face, deepening the lines around her mouth and eyes. Caleb barely spoke at all now, except for one thing he whispered to me 2 nights ago. "They don't just want me, Dad," he said, voice trembling. "They want us all, but they like me best." I didn't ask him how he knew. We crossed into Kentucky when it happened again, worse than before. We'd parked at a secluded campground far from the highway, thinking maybe isolation would help, No noise, no light, no distractions, just us alone with the forest. Maybe we thought they wouldn't find us here. But that night, the forest came alive. It started with the smell. Acrid, metallic, like burning copper. I woke choking on it, my throat raw. The RV was suffocatingly hot, every window fogged from the inside. I wiped one clean and froze. They were everywhere. Dozens of copies standing silently around the RV in a perfect circle, faces upturned toward us. Their eyes caught the faint moonlight, gleaming white like bone. They didn't move, didn't blink, didn't breathe, just stood there, as if waiting for a signal. Then, one by one, they smiled. The air outside rippled, no sound, no light, just a shimmer like heat off pavement, and suddenly I realized the stars above us had doubled again. No. Tripled. The sky fractured like glass, layers of stars offset, sliding in and out of alignment. Erin grabbed Caleb and pulled him close, her voice rising in a panicked prayer I'd never heard her say before. And then everything went quiet. Not just silence. The world went soundless. No wind through the trees, no chirp of crickets, not even the hum of the RV engine. It was as if reality itself muted. I pressed my palms to my ears in terror and felt nothing. Even my own heartbeat was silent. That's when I saw the door handle move. Slow, deliberate. It turned halfway, stopped, and then, without warning, flung itself downward so hard it rattled the entire frame. Erin screamed silently, holding Caleb tighter. I lunged forward and threw my shoulder against the door, bracing it, though some instinct screamed it wouldn't matter. In that frozen, soundless void, I felt something press back. Not physical hands, but weight. Like gravity tilting in the wrong direction. The walls flexed. The metal groaned beneath unseen pressure. And in the window, inches from my face, my own double stared in at me. Its grin impossibly wide now, splitting its face unnaturally. And then it spoke, though I heard nothing, forming words I understood anyway, burned directly into my mind. Let him go. He's ours. Caleb sobbed soundlessly against Erin's chest, and I felt something in me snap. I grabbed the keys, twisted them so hard I nearly broke them, and slammed the RV into drive. The moment we lurched forward, sound returned in a deafening roar. The pounding of fists on metal, the shrieking of steel under strain, Erin screaming in my ear, Caleb crying out. I floored it, bouncing down the dirt road, trees whipping past in the headlights. In the mirrors, the copies ran alongside us, dozens, maybe hundreds, all sprinting with impossible speed, their limbs jerking like marionettes pulled too fast. And then as suddenly as it began, it was gone. We burst out onto the highway, the sky above whole again. No doubled stars, no fractures, no copies, just silence and road. Erin clung to me, crying softly. Caleb didn't make a sound, and in that silence I realized the truth that's haunted me since we didn't outrun them. They let us go, which means they're not done. I haven't slept more than an hour at a time since that night. Every time I close my eyes, I hear them. Our voices, distorted and wrong, slipping in through the cracks of my mind like smoke under a door. I see their faces in reflections where they don't belong, in the RV's microwave glass, in gas station windows at 3 a.m., in the rearview mirror when the highway behind me is empty. Sometimes I catch Caleb staring too, like his small eyes fixed on a corner of the room or the darkened window, like he's listening to something only he can hear. We keep moving. I've lost track of the states, Ohio, maybe Pennsylvania by now, but it doesn't matter. I avoid campgrounds. We sleep in Walmart parking lots, behind truck stops, anywhere with lights and cameras and other people nearby. But the thing is, the other people don't seem to notice. Not the doubled stars when they appear for a heartbeat above us. Not the way Caleb sometimes murmurs things in his sleep, words in a cadence that doesn't belong to him. Erin caught him last night, sitting up in his bunk with his eyes wide open. He was whispering to the empty air, "It's okay. I'll come with you soon." When she shook him awake, he didn't remember saying it. I want to believe this is exhaustion, that I've driven myself insane with fear and sleeplessness. But then I remember the waitress in Ely. I remember the way her hands trembled when she asked if we'd seen it. I remember her saying her husband heard his own voice calling him too. What if he didn't leave Nevada at all? What if he just followed it the way it wants Caleb to? 2 nights ago, parked in a truck stop outside Pittsburgh, I woke to quiet tapping from the RV bathroom door. I crept toward it, gripping my flashlight like a weapon. My breath felt heavy and loud in the silence. The tapping stopped. And then I heard Caleb's voice, soft and muffled from the other side. "Dad," it whispered. But Caleb was asleep, snoring lightly in his bunk. My chest went ice cold. I pressed my ear to the door, trembling. "Open it," the voice said, perfectly calm. I lunged back, slammed the bathroom door shut, and shoved the latch down hard. Aaron woke to the noise, disoriented, and I could barely explain what happened without my voice breaking. That entire night, we heard faint knocking inside the walls, like someone crawling between them, dragging their fingers along the aluminum. I don't think our RV is ours anymore. Yesterday morning, we stopped for fuel. I told Aaron and Caleb to stay inside while I paid. It was bright daylight, crowded, normal. People filling tanks, sipping coffee, yawning like they'd all slept soundly. For a moment, it felt almost safe. But when I came back out, my heart nearly stopped. There were 2 RVs, identical. Same make, same model, same scratches down the side panel, same cracked antenna. One was ours. The other, I don't know. Its door was closed, windows tinted, but I swore I saw movement inside. I backed away, every muscle screaming to run. As I fumbled with my keys, I glanced up, and in the driver's seat of the second RV, I saw myself. He stared at me, smiling. I bolted into ours, slammed the door, and floored it out of that gas station without a word. Aaron's shouts barely registered over the roaring in my ears. I didn't dare look back until we hit the interstate, but when I did, there it was. My doubles RV, a few cars back, keeping perfect distance. It followed us for hours, always just far enough that I couldn't make out its plates, always there in the mirrors, never passing, never falling behind. And then, just as the sun dipped low and painted the world in blood-red light, it vanished between 2 semis. Gone, like it was never there. Aaron didn't see it. Neither did Caleb, but I know what I saw. Tonight, we're parked in an RV lot near a crowded suburban strip mall. There are cameras here, bright halogen lights, people walking dogs and smoking cigarettes in hoodies, civilization. But just now, as I sit here writing this with the blinds drawn tight, I heard Caleb whisper something in his sleep again. "It's okay," he murmured. "We can all go together this time." And outside, past the blinds, I swear I heard footsteps, slow, patient, coming closer, and above us, through the roof vent, I see it. The stars are splitting again. I don't even remember standing up, but suddenly I was at the window, 2 fingers pulling the blinds down, just enough to see out. The parking lot was awash in halogen glare, sharp enough to make every parked RV cast hard shadows. Everything looked normal at first. Families milling in and out of their rigs, someone walking a small dog near the dumpsters, a man smoking beside his pickup. But then I noticed it. 1 RV across the lot, identical to ours. Its blinds were open. Inside, I could see shapes, 3 of them. A man, a woman, a child. They stood perfectly still in the center of their cabin, facing forward, not watching TV, not talking, just standing. And then one by one, they all turned their heads toward me. My heart seized. I ducked back instinctively, pulling the blinds closed like a guilty child. Aaron stirred from the couch, bleary-eyed, and asked what was wrong. I couldn't even speak. I just pointed upward. Through the roof vent, the sky fractured wider. Stars smeared into doubles, triples, the moon splitting into pale, overlapping crescents. The air felt heavier, denser, like pressure building underwater. And then Caleb woke. He sat straight up in his bunk without a sound, eyes wide and glassy. Aaron rushed to him, but he didn't look at her. He looked straight at me, his lips curling into a smile that wasn't his. "They're here now," he said in a voice that was layered, his voice and another older voice beneath it. I froze. Before I could respond, the knocks began again. This time, they weren't just at the door. They came from everywhere. Roof, walls, floor, windows. Surrounding us completely, relentless, like 1,000 fists pounding in perfect rhythm. "Stay away from the windows," I barked, hauling Aaron back from the blinds. My hands were trembling uncontrollably, the flashlight beam shaking across the floor. I grabbed Caleb by the shoulders, trying to shake him from whatever trance had taken hold. But he just smiled wider. "It's okay, Dad," he said softly. "You don't have to run anymore." Erin gasped. Her eyes were fixed on the window. Slowly, against every instinct in my body, I turned to look. They were pressed against the glass. Dozens of faces, ours and strangers, staring in, mouths stretched in silent grins. Their skin shimmered faintly like light bending through heat waves. My own double met my gaze and lifted a hand, palm flat to the glass. The others followed, all in unison, until it looked like the entire RV was being encased in mirrored hands. And then the glass began to bow inward. I lunged forward, slamming the latch on the windows tight, shouting for Aaron to grab Caleb. The air inside the RV warped, the lights flickering violently. The pounding grew deafening, shaking the walls until I thought they'd buckle. I could hear Aaron sobbing, could hear Caleb's warped voice laughing through the noise. I jammed the keys into the ignition and turned. The engine roared to life, thank God, but the headlights illuminated something I wish I'd never seen. The parking lot was gone. In its place stretched a flat gray expanse under a fractured sky. No lights, no buildings, no sound except for the knocking and the groaning metal. It was like we'd been peeled out of the world and dropped into something else entirely. I floored it anyway. The RV lurched forward across that barren nothingness, tires kicking up dust that shimmered unnaturally in our wake. I didn't know where I was driving, only that I had to move, had to put space between us and them. In the mirrors, they followed. Dozens, hundreds, running alongside the RV, matching our speed effortlessly. Some were twisted versions of us, faces stretched too wide, limbs bent wrong, jaws hanging slack. Others were strangers, blank-eyed and hollow, all of them smiling. And over it all, the stars above rippled and bled light like they were tearing wider. I gripped the wheel until my hands ached, throat raw from screaming over the engine's roar. Aaron held Caleb tight in the back, murmuring his name through tears. Then Caleb turned his head, and in that doubled, layered voice he said, "We're already there." And suddenly, the RV stopped. No brakes, no slowing. One moment we were barreling forward, and the next we were perfectly still. Outside, the figures stood in a vast circle around us, motionless under that shattered sky. The knocking stopped. The silence was absolute. My double stepped forward from the crowd, smiling, and I realized the door was unlocking itself. The click of the lock was louder than anything I'd ever heard. It cut through the silence like a gunshot, sharp and final. My stomach twisted, every instinct screaming at me to hold it shut, to barricade it, to fight. But my hands wouldn't move. It was like the air itself had thickened, pinning me in place. Aaron's voice cracked behind me. "Don't let it open, please, please." She was clutching Caleb so tightly he whimpered, but even he wasn't fighting anymore. He just stared at the door, that strange calm still frozen on his small face. The handle turned slowly. I threw myself forward, shoving my shoulder against the door with everything I had left. Pain lanced through me, but it didn't budge. It wasn't just that something was pushing from the other side. It was as if reality itself was bending to let it happen. And then it opened. Just a crack at first. Cold air, if it was air, spilled in, dry and electric, tasting like metal on my tongue. The gap widened, inch by inch, and standing there framed in that impossible sky was me. Not twisted this time, not hollow-eyed or grinning wrong. He was exactly me. Same flannel shirt, same tired lines on his face, same grip of terror in his expression. For a moment, I felt dizzy, like I was looking in a mirror that reflected something true I hadn't realized was missing. He didn't speak. He didn't have to, because I knew exactly what he wanted. Behind him, the others stood in silence, still and endless, stretching out to the horizon. The doubled stars glimmered above them, splintering wider, each point of light refracting into 2, then 4, then 8. The whole sky pulsed with it, like a heartbeat. I turned to Aaron, to Caleb. Her eyes were wet, terrified, pleading with me not to move. Caleb's lips trembled. "Dad," he whispered, his voice finally his own again. "Don't go." And that broke me free. I slammed the door shut with a roar, my muscles screaming as I fought against whatever force was trying to hold it open. For a moment, it felt like I was wrestling with myself, literally, my own arm pushing back on the other side, but then something gave way. The door slammed shut, and I twisted the lock so hard it bent. The knocking started again instantly. Furious this time. Pounding that rattled every plate, every panel, every screw in the RV. I spun the wheel, flooring it without looking back, the engine screaming in protest as the tires spun in that gray dust until finally, we lurched forward. I didn't see where I was going. There was no road, no sky I recognized, nothing but endless flat and those pounding footsteps behind us. But then, like cresting a wave, I felt it. A jolt, a shift, and suddenly we were back. The world snapped around us in an instant, blacktop beneath the tires, the glow of a suburban strip mall, and the hum of distant traffic. The RV park was there exactly as it had been, with halogen lights flickering overhead. I slammed the brakes, heart hammering, lungs burning. Behind us, empty pavement, no duplicates, no endless circle of figures, no shattered sky, just normalcy. Aaron sobbed, clutching Caleb, and I realized I was shaking so badly I could barely hold the wheel. I don't know how long we sat there, the three of us huddled in silence, listening for any sound that didn't belong. None came, but as I stared out the windshield, my eyes drifted upward. The stars looked right, whole, except one of them flickered. Not a plane, not a satellite, just a single star pulsing faintly, like a reminder. And I swear I heard it then, a whisper, low and close, not in my ears but inside my skull. Next time, don't run. I don't know how to fight this. I don't even know what this is. All I know is that every night since I watch the sky, and every night I wait for that flicker, because when the lights split again, when the stars tear open and they come back for us, I'm not sure we'll escape a second time. And maybe part of me doesn't want to.